welcome to episode number 72 of Killer POV. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rob G. from Icons of Fright. With me, Elric Kane, who's giggling like a madman.
He's giggling.
I'm laughing like Larry Drake.
That's right. That'll make sense. And Rebekah McKendry, Fangoria. What's up?
How are you guys doing tonight?
Pretty good.
That's
Tired.
good. I'm exhausted today. It's been a long day.
We should have brought alcohol, which I forgot. Instead, we're sparkling water today.
I have lemonade, which I'm drinking out of a coffee mug, so it's just extra weird.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So this is going to be our medical malpractice episode. We've been wanting to... I remember at the beginning of the show last year, right after Rebekah had Marnie, after you gave birth to your daughter, you had come up with a medical malpractice set of questions for
I did
hard trivia.
It was right afterwards. I did the trivia round.
Ever since that, I was like, oh, we got to do that for a show.
I forgot that's why it was.
But I was waiting for this guest to confirm, and it took a while, but he is here. So we're going to get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, there was a story behind why I did it for trivia, because while I was having, this is kind of a gory story, but fun. While I was actually, I was about to have the cesarean, and they called in the anesthesiologist to put the I don't know what it is, the thingy in my back, the spinal. They somehow stop your spine or something like that.
What makes your lower half go numb?
It does. Well, actually, it's not even your lower half. You're numb from like neck down.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't even feel myself breathing. It was pretty creepy. But so there's this small man back there, like with thumb deep in my spine, doing something. And he's
looking for your soul.
Yeah,
from the crypt.
Trying to find the tingler.
Yeah, the tingler.
But he's trying to relax me, and so he's making small talk, and he's like, "What do you do for a living? What did you do last night?" And the night before I went in to have birth or give birth, I had actually done a trivia night, and I was talking about the trivia night and how I'd been there last night, and then we got up this morning and decided to come, have Marnie. And he was like, "Oh, what type of rounds do you do? I love horror films." And while he's like got his thumb in my spine, he goes, "You should totally do like a medical malpractice, evil doctor round." And I was
nice.
"Okay, we can do that." So, and then so while I was actually giving birth, trying to kill time and keep myself calm, Dave and I talked about that and came up with...
thinking of questions?
Yeah, we were thinking of questions while, we were like waiting. It's a very long process. So.
I always think the best doctors do have those dark sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Like some of them are really boring and straight, no humor, but the ones that do have humor tend to be a little darker.
Yeah.
And it's usually quite funny, I think.
The person who actually, my doctor who gave birth to my daughter, all of her children are named after Led Zeppelin members.
Wow.
And so it was just like, I loved my doctors through the whole experience. So,
True story, I got
So this is dedicated to you, Rebekah's doctors.
It was Dr. Yoshi was my anesthesiologist.
There you go. This is to you, Dr. Yoshi.
Yes.
You don't play cricket here, but I was hit with a cricket ball in my nuts when I was like 16, and it one side inflated like 3 times, maybe 4 times the size of what it should be.
Oh my
and I was
God.
freaking out because I'm 16 and went to this doctor, I swear to you, and I had ice pack on. I was like actually like passed out and everything. It was pretty intense. And I said something like, what will happen? I hope I don't have to have anything removed or something. And he goes, "Well, don't worry about it. Hey, one does the same job as 2. And I remember that was like the darkest thing you could say to like a 16-year-old who's, is surgically on your table. So luckily everything's intact. But it was a pretty terrifying, but there's that humor. So urologists are just the cut-ups.
No, I had, when I was in college, I got pneumonia really bad, and I was having these intense pains in my chest from it. And I went into the doctor, and they thought it could be a blood clot with the pneumonia. And he was like making jokes about it. He's like, "Yeah, if you get home and you just pass out cold tonight and like stroke, it was the blood clot." And I'm like, "Oh my God, are you serious?" It wasn't.
So there's some truth to a movie we might be discussing later.
Yes.
We'll get to that in
Rob,
a second.
do you have a creepy medical story?
Not really. I mean, the only thing I can remember that I thought was funny was there was a period where I, like when I was really, really young, where I had some, I don't know what you can call them, maybe sores or like little lumps developed on my chest. It was a weird thing.
Go with lesions. It's a much better word.
It was just like hard. It was like hardened, for lack of a better word, hardened acne.
Okay.
Like if acne just hardened or whatever. So the only way to cure it is you have to get a shot of steroids.
Oh, wow.
And I remember because I had several in the center of my chest, my doctor, the way that he got rid of it was he had a syringe of steroids and you had to stab them really quickly, like in the center of it. So I just remember this image of him on top of me, kind of making jokes like, "You all right?" While he's like stabbing at my chest repeatedly.
No wonder you like Norman
him.
Bates.
And I'm like, yeah, I don't feel a thing.
Wow.
Oh, that is intense.
Yeah, but
it sounds like you were growing fish scales.
Yeah, who knows? It was something horrific.
I don't think I've been to a doctor in like 15 years. I don't avoid it purposely. I just never go to the doctor.
Are you serious?
Whereas you're like a total medical case. Like
well, it's just the asthma.
Well, you're sick like every 2 days.
No,
There's
it's the asthma.
up.
No, like a cold is never a cold for me. I never just get the flu. Like I'll have the cold for 2 days and then it's like 3 weeks worth of asthma attacks.
And you can't see it, but she's got a catheter. Awkward pauses on the show.
You know, I've got that thing that goes right here. This is actually a voice thing.
From Leatherface.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So, remember that one of these?
Yeah.
Nope. Not disguised, though.
Yeah. I got some bitchin' asthma, but the rest seems to work okay. For now.
Well, we got movies to talk about. Actually, I have to ask Rob a question first because this is a trivia question that came up, and I've been hounding Turek, and I can't ask her, and you're going to be totally neutral. Okay?
What?
So just quiet down, Bekah. You wrote this. I was very upset with trivia about this.
Okay.
William Lustig directed how many Maniac Cop films?
I didn't write this.
Technically?
Just that was the question. How many did he direct?
He directed all 3.
He directed 2.
2.5 because his
one
third
is Alan Smithy and the other guy directed it.
But he directed. He was hired and he directed 50 so minutes of 3.
I guess the question is, if you take your name off a movie,
how
are
many
you the
did he
director?
complete? Is the more appropriate?
Maybe the question's in fault, but like I think if Alan Smithy credit appears on a movie, you didn't direct it because you got your name. I mean, to me, I was just like, really, you're going to accept 2.5 and 3? I was like, come on. The other guy, the producer, directed it, half of it.
That's true.
And William Lustig wanted nothing to do with it.
I would say, I mean, the correct answer is 2.
Yeah.
But he did technically direct 3. That
I won't let this go, Turk.
That's not worded properly.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It wasn't word. Not a shades.
Ryan,
Could have
he's
won around.
Still bitching about
He
it.
should have said, how many is he credited as director?
Alan Smith. But then it did put me on an interesting track of thinking about Alan Smithy and all the films and thinking, wouldn't it be cool to have an Alan Smithy film festival?
Oh my God,
and you just
amazing.
play all these Alan Smithy movies.
There's actually a documentary called Who Was Alan Smithy, and it goes through all of these
Is
films.
it? I know there's
there's
a movie called Burn Hollywood Burn, the Alan Smithy film, but it's a feature. It's a narrative. It's not documentary. And
I
it
swear,
sucks.
I watched a documentary, or maybe it was like a TV show or something,
been.
but
It
there
could've
was
been like
something
something.
I watched. It may have just been like an hour special of something where they talked about how Alan Smithy got started and the whole history of it.
I don't actually know. I'll have to, after this, look up how that particular name got used the first time. Anyway,
Right.
I'm glad we could answer that neutrally, even if I disagree.
Well, before you dive into the movies, I just want to say really quickly something that's on my mind. I went to Universal Studios this last weekend. By the time you hear this, Universal's House of Horrors will be closing down within a day. It closes on September 1st, which I think is an awful, awful shame.
What's the reasoning?
I mean, I don't know for sure because I have not heard an official statement from Universal. It's mostly from Universal themed websites and stuff. But when I was physically there, I asked the people that worked there and they're like, yeah, this is the last week. And the rumor I heard is that they're clearing it out to make room for more dining area, more really awful dining, overpriced dining in the area.
Just like Disneyland.
And to me, it's just, I mean, we're a horror show. And to me, it's always amazing how disrespectful Universal is towards their horror subgenre, especially considering those movies made that studio.
And all
the classic
studios.
ones. Pretty much.
Every couple decades, it reinvents a studio.
Yeah, but Universal's, I mean, it seems like they're always going to go where the money is. Like, they're going to keep pushing that Transformers button. And
that's fine.
But they could have gone modern with it. They could have gone some of their modern horror, you know what I mean? They could have done something different with it.
I also don't understand, like, this close to Halloween Horror Nights, you know? And I mean, that's such a big hit every year. I mean, to me, House of Horrors, I know I'm a weird horror kid, but it's the first and last thing I always do when I go to Universal. And
I've only been during Horror Nights. You know?
Oh, yeah, and it's different.
Yeah,
I mean, during the year,
it's
it's an homage to all the classic films. But it's a shame they're closing it down, and I just wanted to make mention of that. And I read on the way here, which I posted both on our Facebook and our Twitter, so you can go back to Wednesday and look at it. Apparently, Universal is also planning on tearing down their legendary Stage 28. This is where Lon Chaney played the Phantom of the Opera, where they filmed that. This is where Hitchcock filmed sequences from Psycho, from Torn Curtain.
Is it somewhere you can see or not?
Well, I mean, you pass it on the back lot, and from what I understand, I thought it was still active, and I don't know the specifics. I posted a petition that explains the whole thing, but to me, that's a piece of cinema history. I mean, dating back to the silent film era and Phantom. Right. So I don't know. I don't know if it'll make any difference. It probably won't, but I posted the link to the petition, and I signed it, and I recommend you guys sign it too.
You know,
So-
for the
Hadn't heard
past
about that.
2 years at Halloween Horror Nights, Universal had this maze, and I wish I could remember the name of it now, but it was about some type of spirit that comes back to haunt. Lenore. It's not Lenora.
It was something. It was a Mexican.
It's a Mexican Hispanic
something.
ghost story about a girl on her
original.
wedding
I think
night.
they're making a movie out of it.
That's what I thought, but they've been saying that for 2 years, and nothing's ever come of it. And I was wondering what happened with
I
that.
don't know.
So yeah,
But that was a good one.
that was my favorite maze for the past 2 years, because whenever they did, like, whenever Universal would pull out the movie themed mazes like the Wolfman or, you know, even the Thing maze, they just weren't as good as that one because it was so inventive. So.
The other ones are good. I mean, they're all fun in their own way, but there's something about going into something you don't know, like that one. And, you know, even like the Alice Cooper one last year was
one
cool.
kicked ass.
So
I like
things
that
that
one.
are like
You know what they
boring.
should have challenged? They should challenge the creators to be like, we're going to have all these mazes. They can be themed on something like, say, The Thing or Insidious, but it has to be a sequel that has never been made. So you're like,
That'd
take
be-
the
that'd be
idea of
fun.
The Thing, but now set The Thing. Let's say it got off the Antarctic.
Right.
And went somewhere into a city. Now
my God,
go.
yeah, it'd be kinda
Or
cool.
Insidious,
'Cause,
go
like,
beyond, you know?
I was so bored in the Hostel maze last year. And it's not just
Yeah,
because
that
I
one-
didn't like the movie. It was just like there was nothing to it.
Yeah, I thought, you know, Insidious kind of disappointed me, to be honest, because there was just like, you know, dark rooms and the you know, red-faced demon. But
Hostel just had guys pointing guns at you, which I was kind of creeped out by, even though knowing that they're fake. I'm still like,
Yeah, I
dude,
don't
this
like
guy's
guns.
pointing
I don't like that
Because
at
they
all.
were
Kind of
like
my
up
face.
in your face with them. And I was like, even though it's fake, it's a
the
little.
girls out front were
Not like
good.
fun scary. It's more like, dude, stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, the girls out front
Girls
were
up front
fun.
got me on the door. That's I'm not complaining with the Serbian accents.
all right, films. Becca and I didn't see too much, but Elric, you saw
What'd
a
you
bunch of
see?
stuff.
Well, I don't know why this happened, but usually, basically, I've been finally catching up with things. But you know, I make these lists of kind of like the hidden horror book that you lent me,
which is right here.
which is right there, which is pretty good. And I got maybe 3 or 4 out of there. Usually on these lists of 100, there'll be like 3 or 4 I haven't seen or would even want to see. Things that there's some that in there where you're like, the beast must die. I'm like, really? That's
a really boring
That's a really
film.
boring, also not very good. And I just, you know, it's one of those kind of Amicus or Hammer, I can't remember.
Right.
But anyway, that aside, I've been between that and Nightmare USA and a couple other books. I'm just trying to get through stuff, which means I'm going to start, and you can hold me to this show. I'm going to try to watch at least one VHS a week of something that I can't get any other way, of things that I'm working on a list.
You're going to be
I went to
borrowing
Eddie
a lot of
Brandt.
my stuff. Oh,
Well,
you
Eddie
went to
Brandt,
Eddie Brandt.
yeah, Eddie Brandt is
good.
where I seem to find all this stuff I was trying to buy online, and I was missing out on eBay auctions by like $1. And then I went to Eddie Brandt's and they have it all, and I'm like, well, whatever.
Yeah, just
You
rent
know,
it
it's
from there.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I've been catching up on stuff. First one actually is one back to our anthology episode, and actually Craig Perry gave me the hookup, so thank you, Craig. Night Train to Terror, which I'd never seen.
Have not seen
heard.
either.
It is. I'm not kidding. It is like it's the Visitor of anthologies. It is so batshit. I mean, it like the first story, I was like, oh, bummer. It's just not a good anthem. The first story I didn't care for much. The wraparound's just phenomenal. It's God and the dead and Satan on a train traveling, like really, really nicely performed and everything. And they're basically battling over souls. And then it goes into each story. Well, what I found out later, one of the reasons it's kind of so all over the place is each of those stories were actually feature films that were shot and just didn't really work. So they truncated them, and not even by the same directors. I think the first 2 were by the same director. And then the third one, which is, you know, just amazing. The third story, I think, was almost like a mini feature, like 40-minute mini feature so these were not meant to be together. They were not meant to be an anthology, and they were not meant to be short films. The first one, it has Richard, what's the guy from House, the Vietnam vet?
Richard Mall.
Richard Mall in 2 roles. Pardon me. And it's just, there's something about it that's a little clunky, but as it goes on, the second one felt like a precursor to Saw. It's like about a death club. And it's really funny and weird. But then the third one's just like batshit crazy, like this eternal henchman of the devil who basically doesn't age. And he was a Nazi, and then he's in the 70s, is basically trying to destroy, you know, humankind and these people interacting with him. And just has these crazy effects and these moments that pop out. And this is probably, I would guess that this is probably one of the most fun films you could ever watch with an audience. Like, it just has all those elements where you're like, oh my God. Like, so in terms of our anthologies, I would go back to that one and say it is a lot of fun,
Night Train to Terror.
Night Train to Terror, yep. And Vinegar Syndrome released it on Blu-ray like a month and a half ago.
Wow.
So it went from being kind of hard to find to it's out there pristine. Okay, a couple of those. The Sender is one I've wanted to see for years. I remember the cover art. It was in the Hidden Horror book. It is a pre-Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it's 80. dream-fueled horror film. Very slow burn. It's gorgeous to look at. It's kind of dull. Like, it doesn't really have the punch. Nightmare has, a key villain. This doesn't have that. But he's a psychic, is basically experiencing all these dreams that everyone else is experiencing his dreams. And they're pretty dark. And I think for people who are fans of those kind of visuals, I think people would get a lot from this film. It was, really highly rated by a lot of people, but it is pretty slow. And I don't feel like the horror pays off, but it's directed by the guy who did Battlefield Earth, which is kind of interesting. Who was an Oscar winner for doing all the effects on Star Trek, Star Wars, the original. So, but yeah, Battlefield Earth is a stinker. So The Sender is interesting. This one I know you're a fan of. I love this film. Road Games.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Growing up, I felt like I'd seen it. Now I'm not so sure if I had. It's literally Rear Window meets The Hitcher. Like literally, it's one of the most. It makes sense now why Richard Franklin was offered Psycho 2 because it's so Hitchcockian.
Yeah.
And his sense of humor, especially, it's almost a comedy. It's like got a thriller setup, but it's funny. Stacy Keach
is amazing.
It would be top like 20 kind of horror performances.
Stacey Keach film.
He's great in everything, and I always call him America's Oliver Reed. He's like so good, but it's really fun, and that was VHS as well. I think I don't think anyone's put that out yet, but they should.
Might be on DVD.
No,
Okay.
I feel like, well, you know what? Mine might be a bootleg now that I'm thinking about it.
Jamie Lee Curtis plays Hitch. It is so Hitchcockian in the humor. Like that's the one thing when you watch it, you'll see what I mean, because it's all innuendos and jokes, but it's never hardcore. It's light. It's a really fun movie. Jump cut. We showed Frankenstein Unbound. Roger, a pristine print, one of the best 16 millimeter prints of anything I've ever seen. I couldn't even believe in a way that it could look like that.
Which is also the last thing Corman
Roger Corman,
himself.
except till recently. Somebody said he directed a scene recently. But yeah, it's the last feature, and I think there's a reason. Roger seems to be a very practical. Part of his success is that he's very practical minded, and I think he knew when he made a film that didn't connect that he was just like, all right, that was too expensive. I can't do this again because I need to make money at this. And I think he did the same thing with his William Shatner, The Intruder, which I think is his best movie. But it was like a personal, very racial, politics, and that him and his brother made it, and it made no money for them. And he's like, all right, we'll never do that again, even though it was critically approved. So I think the one thing that I was hit over the head, Frankenstein Unbound is not a great movie. It's pretty clunky at times, but he's going for big things in it. It felt expensive for a Roger Corman film, and that's probably why it felt so hard. But the main thing is it's got time travel in it, but it is a film that is out of time. Like, it is literally like 15 years past when those kind of movies were being made. And so you're watching it
1990 or so?
Yeah, but I mean, it looks like it should have been 1974.
Right.
I mean, it's got all the kind of Hammer type stuff. It's got a few future things. The one thing that was really interesting about it, and if anyone knows Panos Cosmatos, and if we can ever get him on the show, who did Beyond the Black Rainbow, there are 4 moments in that movie that were almost literally moments I had memories of Beyond the Black Rainbow. So I'm now wondering if that's like one of his big influences.
Because there's Frankenstein Unbound is like his...
There's a scene where he's driving a car that looks exactly like when John Hurt's driving a car, and the color palette at the end, which is also a little Argento-y, but it's really Beyond the Black Rainbow.
Interesting.
I thought that was weird. My VHS one I found, I wasn't kidding, I saw a lot of films. My VHS I watched this, it was called Death Weekend. It was from, I think if it's not Hidden Horrors, it was from the Nightmare USA book. It's Canadian, Ivan Reitman produced, and that's what made me laugh when I went back to researching and realizing Ivan Reitman, produced Cronenberg's first 2, great features. He did Shivers and Rabid, which is crazy. And he's if you don't know, he's the director of Ghostbusters. He produced this one. It is not one I'd necessarily recommend unless you were writing like a book or were interested in rape revenge films, because it's very grisly. It's very Straw Dogs, or House at the End of the Park was the one I kept thinking of, which I don't like those kind of films particularly. Home Invasion, ugly, but it had a really interesting... The heroine is actually pretty good. She felt from the start not just a victim type. She actually is always kind of fighting from the first moment. She's not into the guy who even took her up there to this cabin to sleep with. But it has a very ambiguous ending, which I think people could write a lot about if they're writing a book on this kind of film. I still don't even know exactly what I meant. And then last night, the last 2 things, I'll be quick about one of them, and one of them I might have to fuel up a little. I saw it was a Cannibal double feature at New Beverly. I saw Man from Deep River, Umberto Lenzi, It's very melodramatic. You know, my problem with, and this is what I expect from all cannibal films, probably my least favorite subgenre. I always expect that the drama will bore me to tears, but that there'll be a moment in it that's interesting. And this film, anytime the natives, which were real natives, I think this one's in Thailand or somewhere, they would do just like little tribal things that no one could have written without going there and researching. Like, I guess one of the tribal people loses, say, their husband. So they burn his ashes, and then she makes love to every member of the male tribe on the ashes in front of everyone watching until she likes one of them and picks him as weird things like that, where you're watching going, oh, suddenly you go from being quite bored while you're watching a movie, like the narrative and the character stuff, you're just like, oh, I don't care. It's so melodramatic. And suddenly that happens and you go, oh, okay, that's interesting. Or there's a few moments like that. And so I got to the end of that, and here's my quick history of the Cannibal Holocaust. In New Zealand, it was banned. I saw it on VHS. I might have seen it cut. I don't know. I saw it like 12 years ago and I remember being kind of bored and didn't take it in. Like, it's not a movie I've ever thought about since.
Right.
I went last night because I knew it had just come out on Blu-ray, and I was really like, oh, I wonder how I'll just approach this. I'm going to put the animal stuff aside. I'm just going to watch it as a movie. And I'm not kidding you that this, next to like the first time I saw Chainsaw Massacre, was the most I've ever been like smacked by a movie. Like,
wow.
I sat there. On one hand, I think it's like Terrence Malick beautiful. On the other hand, it's one of the most vile things I've ever seen.
The soundtrack is incredible.
The soundtrack's one of the, now probably is my favorite soundtrack overall, especially seeing it not isolated. I was listening to it a lot without seeing the picture, seeing it with the pictures and realizing how it's going for this absolute contrast of what you're seeing. But the thing about the movie in a crowd, I was sitting next to Clue the whole time, just at the front row, watching Cannibal Holocaust on 35. I didn't
text you beforehand because you were like, I think I'm going to go to the Cannibal films tonight. I was like, that is way too intense for me to watch two of those in a row.
Well, and the first one wasn't that intense. It was very melodramatic.
No, Man from Deep River.
But the second one, I don't think I'd want to watch it. It's a hard film to talk about right now. On one hand, I got to say it's one of the most like devastatingly excited I've been about a horror film in like years, like where it really blew me away because the statement was, even though things are being done for exploitation reasons, like they're exploiting by killing real animals, that is, something I can't even start to try to defend.
Right.
But putting that aside and just experiencing a piece of work as an art form or whatever you want to say, he really knew what he was saying with that movie. That is the most critical movie I've ever seen about like American foreign policy. Mm-hmm. I mean, the way it reverses, you see these young people at the start of the movie, they're going out to film their documentary. That's all you see of them. The first half is just entertaining as hell because not Paco, whatever the guide is, he's one of my all-time favorite characters in a movie now. Oh, Chaco. He's just hilarious. He's this guide taking you into the jungle. He's really good actor and everything. And then the second half becomes kind of weird because suddenly it's the found footage half and they're looking at this footage, which I definitely like the second half a little less, but it is so rough because then you realize the Americans who are making a documentary are so much worse than anything the cannibals could do.
Yeah,
and somebody
vile.
Afterwards was saying, what it really means is this is a Holocaust on the cannibals. It's not called Cannibal Holocaust because they're going to kill the Americans. It's because the Americans are going there to Holocaust cannibals. And it was just powerful. And it made me really reappraise found footage, not the film since, but going back to seeing one of the starting points and realizing, it's so well shot. It's always authentic. Like you always know two of them have a bolex. You'll always see one shooting the other. You always feel the perspective, the artistry, and how it's made. And I've not liked any other Ruggero Deodato films, to be honest. I always don't think they're that well made. The way this film's put together it's kind of sublime. And so it was weird. I can't think of many movies because I don't feel that way about Texas where I can just go, that's just an amazing movie. Like it's pretty intense. But this is also like vile. Like it's awful. Like almost maybe it should be banned. And yet a part of me really thinks now, if we were doing our top 10 horror tomorrow, I'd put it in there like in a heartbeat. That's how affected I was. Wow. I don't know if I'd be the same if I saw it. As much as I'm going to buy the Blu-ray just because I now need to see all the stories. I mean,
right. And that's all good stuff that's on there.
I'm not thinking about it going, this might have been, if there was a making of, that would have been one of the greatest ever, because how did they construct some of the effects alone? Like the things that they didn't kill for real. Yeah. I mean, the turtle thing is probably the one thing that, I could have maybe walked out. I mean, it's one of those things where it's just so hard.
I might have said this. Yeah, I might have said this before in the show, and I'd rather save the more in-depth debate for when we have Bob Murawski on, hopefully.
Sure. Yeah.
But I mean, everyone always talks about the animal violence, and to me, I get it. Seeing it and having you be disgusted by that aspect of it only makes the ending more powerful.
Yeah.
Because by the time you get to the ending, which is fake, I mean, that's not a spoiler.
Yeah.
you are so convinced that it's real because of everything that's been
never
set
seen
up.
a found footage
and
film
that's
like that.
a weird kind of trick. That's a weird trick on the mind. So, because they've released a version on DVD that has the animal violence cut out.
Right.
And I think it's kind of pointless. Like,
Right.
I think the reason the ending is as powerful as it is because you're forced to sit through that stuff. It just makes the final
visceral.
10 minutes just as visceral because you're convinced that this is happening to these people.
You're convinced that anything you've seen now, they've blurred it so well. The other thing about it, though, the thing that I honestly could not even, and you might know more about it than me, Gore Zone might have written an article about it, but I just can't believe the effects I'm seeing. And I don't just mean like a woman on a spit.
Yeah. She was sitting on a bicycle seat.
But I mean some of the moments just where something's being cut and the blood squirts out and you're looking going, I see no trickery. I don't know how I'm watching this in it would have been probably shot in 79 or whatever. I don't know how they're pulling this off. It is so like flawless on that level. There's a couple bad acting moments. And here's the other thing. I think when I watched on VHS, I was turned off by some of the humor moments where they're showing the footage to the people sitting in the room. And there's this great, they watch like literally a guy's penis being cut off. And then suddenly it's a screening room with like 3 executives and the lights go dark for a second. They're all sitting there for a beat. And then one of them goes, he's just changing the reel. And everyone laughs. I think when I watched that alone at home, I'm like, oh, that's clunky. In a theater, I realized, man, without that, you would die.
Yes.
You would literally not be able to survive this movie. And it's really cool as a horror fan, even though I might not watch it again entirely. I'd watch bits again for sure, but I don't know if I need to see the animal, violence. The stuff to woman is, the first scene you see where it's like a vengeance killing.
He rapes her with a rock.
Yeah, well, he rapes her with a rock, but he's also saying against her, any possibility of her having a child because of infidelity or something.
Been with another member of the tribe or something.
But seeing that is so rough, and like you said, you don't see the edges of it, so everything you see starts to bleed together. I agree with you. I think there's something. It kind of reminds me of maybe what they're doing to Alex in Clockwork Orange. When they are opening his eyes, make him see. I think this feeling of seeing certain things and then it all blends together, and by the end, all of it washes. When it hits the black, I think it just all kind of washes over you. Yeah. For a second. But honestly, I think what I'm getting so passionate about is if you're ever going to see this movie, if it screens in your town on 35, see it with other people so you also can take a breath afterwards. And I just think it's a really powerful statement movie, which I don't usually like statement movies. And this one really knocked my socks off.
Now, have you seen Cannibal Ferox? Because I actually like Ferox better than Holocaust.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think
in general, weirdly enough, I don't like cannibal movies because I find them kind of dull.
I've never been a fan of them, but Cannibal Ferox, for some reason,
I've seen Let Them Die. Is that same as Let Them Die Slowly?
Then
movie. I've seen Let Them Die Slowly.
For some reason, that one just kind of connected with me a bit more than Cannibal Holocaust did. But that said, when I was teaching, I always showed Cannibal Holocaust to my students in my horror history class, just because it's kind of the granddaddy.
I can't imagine showing that to students. I'd be like,
that's rough.
They always approach it with it's going to be nothing. But it's my example of, how they were trying to push the envelope in the 1970s. Plus, most of the cannibal films are kind of derived out of Mondo films, which was another big trend at the time.
Well, it felt like this was a critique on Mondo, too.
Is. That's why the animal violence is in there as well, because in Mondo films, a lot of what you were seeing was fake, but the animal violence was always real.
I got the feeling the documentary filmmakers themselves were kind of meant to be those kind of filmmakers. Like they were the guys going out for building a sensational story and restructuring events and hopefully we'll get Bob Murawski on here because he wrote the opening titles, which are really funny. Some of that stuff is pretty hilarious. But no, it's hats off that horror can still make a crowd go that silent. You know what I mean? It's not easy. So, check out the Blu-ray from Grindhouse Releasing if you're curious.
Nice. Well, I only had one that I just am curious about because, Elric, I know you saw it, Quiet Ones. Oh, yeah. I went back and I watched it this weekend, and the guy I was watching it with was an editor, and he just was appalled by the editing and had the theory that the entire movie sucks because of the editing, and if the editing was good, it would have been a fantastic film. Could have been.
I mean, it wasn't like a bad drama film. It was actually pretty... It's a studio film, so it's not bad. It's well made. It's just those shock tactics with every sound scare just bore me. Yeah. There's nothing new there.
Mm-hmm. So, Rob, you got to see it just so I can get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I like the actress from Bates Motel who's in it.
She was good in it.
I want to see it.
I actually liked her.
Which one was she?
The blonde? Wasn't she?
Yeah, no. No. What's her name? Emily Cook, I think.
You mean the one who has the air supply thing in Bates Motel? I like her in that.
She's in Quiet Ones.
I did not.
So wait, what one was she? It was only 2 girls in Quiet Ones.
I haven't even seen a trailer. I don't know anything about the movie.
Maybe she was the girl being exercised. I did not make the connection when I was watching it.
Yeah. So the movie that I actually really enjoyed that I watched this week was called The Awakening. and it is British, and it came out in 2011, but it did not get released
Looks
here.
like Axel Carolyn's cover with a woman walking through. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
So
I've
I
never seen
had
it, but I know.
seen the cover, and I'd come across it last week, or it was a couple of weeks ago when we were doing something about like supernatural investigators. I had come across it, and so I added it to my Netflix queue, and it arrived this week. And it's a supernatural investigator at post-war Britain, so it's kind of it's definitely a time period film. But it is so effective, I have to say. Like, I absolutely loved it. One of the best scares I've seen in years, done with a dollhouse.
Is it like the others? It looks a little bit like the others.
More, it's a little bit more loud than the others. Because the others is all very quiet and children in rooms with curtains drawn and seeing things in shadows. This, surprisingly, it's about a woman who is, very strange at the time because she is, she's educated. She went to Cambridge. She wears pants, and her job is as a paranormal debunker. So
cool.
anytime people think that they have ghosts or anything like that, she goes in and debunks it. And she's doing this at a time when like psychics and seances and things like that are all the rage. And she gets recruited to go to this boys' school where they think that they have a ghost of a boy who died there long ago, and all the boys are scared to death. And she goes there, and what she finds is, she debunks a few things, but then things get different. That's all in the beginning.
I'm sold.
It's really
Netflix
effective.
streaming, I think.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've seen the cover before. Rebecca Hall and Dominic West is in it.
Dominic West is in
Dominic
it too.
West, so.
And one of the crazy, I was watching this with Dave, and midway through he stops, and he had been bitching the day before about how Hollywood doesn't make $15 million horror films anymore. And he was like, that's what I miss from my, from other years, is that, these big budget horror films where the scares are big. And we're watching it when midway through he's like, this is a $15 million horror film. It's like, but they use the money effectively. It's good. So.
Well, like that's how I felt about The Conjuring. Conjuring felt like, it's a big movie.
Yes,
like I felt,
exactly.
I saw your production value, and it was good.
Yeah.
Well, what's the chances of that?
Like everything that's come out recently, I feel like it's always set in one location. It's like a horror in a house. How can we make one house be the setting for everything? Because if we have to change settings, it gets more expensive. So
or delayed for a long time, like Poltergeist.
Yeah.
I'm curious, but could be well.
So what'd you see this week, Rob?
I've got two really quick ones, and then we'll bring our guest on. First one, a film that Elric has brought up several times in the show before. I finally got the chance to watch Blue Ruin, written and directed by Jeremy Saulnier, the same guy that did Murder Party.
Which I liked.
Murder Party is really good.
I like the way it looks on my bench.
Yeah,
unwatched.
I know. Hopefully you'll watch my copy of Murder Party. I mean, Murder Party is like a weird, quirky comedy, horror comedy sort of thing, whereas Blue Ruin is in a whole nother level. And
1970s throwback.
It's a really impressive follow-up for them. I want to watch the making of documentary on the Blu-ray because I hear the story of them making this film is just as impressive as the film itself.
I don't know.
Because Murder Party did not actually open a lot of doors for them. So I'm under the understanding that the writer-director and his wife pretty much put their house up to make this.
She tweeted at someone, and I was really impressed. She tweeted when somebody said they liked it. She tweeted, "I'm glad to hear that. I took my entire retirement and gave it to my husband because I liked the script so much. And I trusted that he could do it." So I thought that was pretty cool.
It's not. I watched it on Netflix Instant. So for any of you that have that, you should definitely watch it that way. It borders. It's not really genre, but I consider
revenge. It's a revenge.
It's
not
genre.
revenge.
The thing that I loved about it's the first American film, and in particular American indie film, that evoked both the same beauty and kind of vibe of the revenge movies coming out of South Korea. Like it totally felt like it could be like a Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance type, or so I consider it genre if you consider old boy genre, like in that realm.
I do,
but I thought it was absolutely terrific, and
Macon Blair gives one of the best performances of the year.
Yeah,
and Saulnier, I think what he did in between. I do know that he shot a lot of art house indie films, as he might have done some horror, I don't know, but I would love if he's ever out here, it'd be good.
Yeah, they're Jersey based, right?
Yeah, they're not here. I know that.
Yeah. So highly recommend that. And second, a few weeks ago, actually 2 weeks ago, I had mentioned that I got a double feature of Hell of the Living Dead with Rats Night of Terror. I finally watched Rats Night of Terror, whereas I watched one great movie this week, which is Blue Ruin. I watched one not so great one, which is Rats.
Oh, you didn't like the schnauzers?
No. I mean, look.
Or I think they were dachshunds.
No, that's a different one.
No, that's Deadly Eyes.
That's Deadly
and
Eyes.
I actually love Deadly Eyes.
This is the Italian one.
This is real rats in it. And you know, this is all right. So this is Bruno Mattei, who
Air just went out of the room.
He's like the Italian that you know, he just didn't have a lot of really good stuff.
No. Now, what I do like about Rats, however, is it's kind of comical in a weird way because apparently a bomb goes off. This all takes place. Apparently, it takes place 2015 is when the bomb goes off because it's a post-apocalyptic thing.
Man,
but
next year.
Yeah, next year. So this and Back to the Future 2 happened. And then the story takes place 225 AB after the bomb.
Oh, wow.
Where
AB.
it's a bunch of like, you know, like Warriors-esque, like, you know, just, you know, drifters. One of them played by Goretta from Demons.
Oh, yeah.
So it's nice to see her in
and
this.
it's often the New Beverly. You'll see her around.
Exactly. Yeah. With her. And it's just, I mean, it's just funny. It's funny seeing little packs of rat and them trying really hard to convince you that they're threatening when none of it is at all. But, you know, the thing I could say about it is it's almost worth it for the last 30 seconds, which has got to be
Wow.
one of the WTF endings of all time.
Okay.
My jaw was dropped. I couldn't believe what I saw. But in that regard, huge kudos to Blue Underground because, you know, of a lot of these exploitation movies, I don't know a company, maybe Synapse, that is doing this quality of restoration because I had Hell of the Living Dead on DVD and this version of it looks flawless. Same for Rats. I mean, they look great. And there's a really good 50-minute documentary called Bonded by Blood with which is interviewing Claudio Fragasso, who directed Troll 2 and was the silent director for Bruno. It was his mentor. So, you know, it's not that expensive for these two flicks, only if you're an Italian horror completist.
Right.
If you're a casual horror fan, you're probably not going to dig these, you know, but that's my recommendations of the week.
Cool.
Okay. And now let's,
we've caught you up with many movies. Now it's time to
Now it's
have
time
a
to
little
laugh.
bit of a laugh.
Yeah. Stand by. Okay. We are back and we are ready to tackle Medical Malpractice.
Yes.
The episode we've wanted to do for almost a year now. And there was only one guest that I could possibly think of that would be ideal for this kind of subject.
And I am ridiculously excited because the poster for this movie was hanging in my dorm room my freshman year of college.
Whoa.
I owned the poster.
Whoa. Plus, you're also a Star Trek. You're a Trekkie.
I'm a Trekkie.
You are a
so this is
Trekkie.
kind of a good
Well, we were
day
just saying
for
we kind of this guest's work, we kind of all split down the three of some of the big shows he's worked on.
Right. I mean, he's a huge presence in TV as a writer. He was on Dexter, which is where I initially met him. Star Trek Enterprise, 24,
I like 24.
quite a lot. He directed an episode of Tales from the Crypt.
And Outer Limits.
And Outer Limits.
I produced Outer Limits. I actually didn't direct any.
Get out of here, you bum.
Sorry.
What a disappointment.
We were too busy keeping the show afloat. And
Fair enough.
But most importantly, he directed and co-wrote.
Co-wrote.
Co-wrote
The Larry Drake biopic.
Dr. Giggles. Manny Coto's with us. Yay.
Thank you very
Welcome.
much. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. And, you know, that's funny that you had the poster of this movie. I remember this was, 92? So I saw this in theaters. I was 16 years old.
Yes, that is.
Wow.
At the height of my horror fandom, I would go see anything I could possibly see. And it's funny because I revisited the film recently. And now that you look back in retrospect at what was going, you know, because the slasher boom was pretty big towards the end of the 80s and then kind of tanked. And then the 90s was a weird time for horror. I am shocked that you made this movie in 92, considering what was going on. So how did Dr. Giggles happen? That's the first question.
I had come off of Tales from the Crypt, and I'd written and directed an episode of Tales from the Crypt. And
Which one was it?
Morning Mess with Vincent Schiavelli. It's the one with the ghouls who build the graveyard. It was like the Grateful Unwanted Outcasts and Dead Away Society, whatever, which spelled ghouls. It was remarkably not clever. But it was, and they find out that there's one reporter, Steven Weber.
Oh, yeah. Then I had seen it.
Yeah. And so so I had done that, and it had come to the attention of Larry Gordon, who had made a deal with Dark Horse Comics, Mike Richardson. Now, in concert with this, I had sold a large spec script with Brian Helgeland called The Ticking Man, which Gordon had bought. So we were kind of on the radar then from having sold this, and I had made well known that I wanted to direct. They had this script lying around called Mr. Giggles that was written by Graham Whiffler. And it was very different from. They didn't want to do it. It was really twisted, and I often think, man, we should have shot that, because it was insane. I mean, Mr. Giggles moved into this neighborhood, and he had the whole neighborhood wired for sound, and he wanted to be I don't remember much more than that, but it was totally different from what I ended up doing. But so they brought me on, and they said, "Can you rewrite this? We want to kind of make a traditional slasher movie." That was the kind of the mandate. And my first draft, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And I wrote kind of this pensive medical psychological thriller thing, and they're like, "What's this? Where's the slasher? Where's the the blood and all that?" So after a couple drafts, I kind of arrived at what became Dr. Giggles, and it was a low budget, $7 million. And they said, go make it. They wanted, they had a budget. Gordon had a budget from in a distribution deal with Universal, and they wanted to make a horror film. This was Lloyd Levin was the one who was really drooling to get it made.
So $7 million was considered low budget then?
It was then, yeah.
Wow.
Now in the age of micro, budgets, but yeah.
Were they hoping for an icon? Because he does feel like one of the last of those kind of attempts of icon.
Right.
I think it was clearly an attempt at an iconic kind of horror character. And I sparked to it. I come from a family of doctors. My father was a doctor, and I had early on when I was young, my dad would bring me in to watch him perform surgeries. I actually would see surgeries being performed. And I remember I was very young, and I remember watching, and I walked into one room, and they had literally had a guy cut in half. I don't know what they were doing, but they were. There's doctors all around him, and they had, completely. I said, it looks like he's completely severed in half. I've never forgotten that impression. But it was. I've always been fascinated by that, by hospitals and doctors. He was alive. Oh no, he was alive. He was being operated on. But it was usually you think of operations with a little incision, but this guy was like completely splayed.
Did your father remove the hearts of most of the town?
That's a family secret. We don't really talk about that much.
I'm sorry. We can edit that out, partner.
So the doctor thing, I sparked very much too.
Where did the humor for the character? Because it seems to me like the kind of character that must have, like if you're sitting around thinking of a character, right, it must have started with this idea of these lines and these the sense of humor that is why we even know this character.
Punny.
I think. Yeah. And some are great, and other ones were just like they're coming.
Yeah, no, it was an attempt to I was heavily influenced at the time by Tales from the Crypt and those kind of
of course.
Wacky, punny.
Freddy, of course,
and Freddy definitely, and I thought it would be fun to apply that to a medical, thriller. I mean, a horror film. And there's so much. Once I started thinking about them, there's so much we all know about doctors and the doctor is in and things that come to mind that I couldn't resist, playing it. It was based on a guy who wanted to be a doctor, who dreamed about being a doctor, so would have absorbed this kind of maniacal, lore.
Mm-hmm.
His backstory is pretty solid. I mean, you sprinkle it through, but it's actually it feels pretty believable. I mean,
especially the reveal of how he escaped.
That's
my favorite. My favorite scene. One of the best things I've ever done.
That's that's straight horror. I mean, that's a lot of it's horror comedy, but that is straight horror.
Yeah,
and I love how scared the cop is. I mean, it's terrifying.
I mean, he breaks out the bottle of booze. Like I haven't told this.
I don't think we need to talk spoilers on here. I think we should just talk about this stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, like watching the movie and it just seems like as a director and obviously as a co-writer, you have a sense of fun for the material. And totally. I know that obviously you have a history predominantly in science fiction with television, but I feel like watching the movie, you're also a big horror fan. So did you grow up on horror? Were you a genre fan?
I loved horror was my genre. I mean, sci-fi and horror were my genre, but horror was, I was a fanatic for horror ever since I was growing up. My favorite movie on Saturday afternoons was watching Tarantula, which would run for some reason on Saturday afternoons in Orlando, Florida. I would gather all the neighborhood kids. We got to watch this movie. And I just loved it from Dracula on. And my kids have the same strange, attraction to horror. They're obsessed. I think it's genetic, but yeah, I loved horror, and I was drooling at the chance to do a horror film.
Do you remember seeing some of the classic slashers in theaters? Like, I mean, were any of them out, the Halloween or any of those? What of those movies did you catch when you were young? Like,
Well, Halloween. I mean, I saw Halloween when I was in college. I remember, and I saw, all the Freddy Kruegers, the Friday the 13th. I loved some more than others. I mean, to be perfectly honest, the slasher movie wasn't my favorite genre. I mean, it just kind of worked out that would be my first movie. But I adored all those. I mean, I was particularly fanatical about the 1930s Universal horrors.
Right.
I was an old school kind of horror.
Which
guy.
one? Which was your favorite? We always debate this.
People, Dracula, the original Dracula Lugosi, has stayed as
not
wooden,
the Spanish version.
No,
Shot on the same stage.
It was interesting. The Spanish version is interesting, but I actually love the very first one.
Yeah.
I love the mashups, the Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. I mean, I love them all. The Mummy.
I kind of asked because there's a bit of Invisible Man in Dr. Giggles. I think.
Oh,
I think he's kind of gone there.
Oh, that's
you know,
right.
there's
See
the
that?
maniacal.
Actually, I remember the one that I watched. Actually, for Giggles was Bride of Frankenstein. I watched it a couple times. That's obviously the best one of them all.
Yeah.
I can't argue that Dracula is better than Bride of Frankenstein, but Dracula is the one that really I just find fascinating. I just love that movie.
Wow.
But no music, it's eeriness. It just seems like it's a movie from another planet. It doesn't play by the same rules.
Mm-hmm.
Do you write? I'm always curious with people who write knowing that. Did you know you were going to direct it?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so writing knowing you're going to direct something, which is rare to have that assurance. I always am curious. Are you writing with someone in mind? Like, is Dr. Giggles Larry Drake, or did you have a picture
somebody else for Dr.
in your
Giggles?
brain?
No, we Larry Drake was pretty much our first choice from moment one. We were
From where? Where was it that you had seen? Was it L.A. Law?
L.A.
Was
Law.
it Darkman? Okay.
L.A. Law, and I think Darkman may have been
He's good in
also in
Darkman.
our
That's
line.
a fun.
He
fun
was
in
great
that.
in Darkman,
Yeah.
and I interviewed one other actor, and I've forgotten his name. He was big. He played Max on TV. Remember the computer guy who would appear on the television screen? Shoot.
Max
Oh,
Headroom.
yeah, Max Headroom.
Max Headroom, the guy who played Max Headroom.
He's in that new show right now with Colin, the guy who's almost James Bond, that Steven Soderbergh's directing. The Nick.
The Nick.
What is his
he?
name? Max
I'm
Headroom's
looking it
name.
up
My
right
God.
now.
Yeah, I'm spacing.
I was forgetting, but I know.
He had Doctor, and his own TV show for all called Doctor. He's a good actor.
He was my other choice. I really, really liked him. We had a great meeting, and he was into it. And
he strikes me. He might be creepier, but he wouldn't have been as iconic. I feel like there's something about his round eyes and his round face of Larry Drake.
no, totally. Larry Drake's, just whole body,
Yeah.
the way he moved, and
Did he take any convincing? I mean, this is kind of a strange character to play. Did you have to kind of coax him into
I think
it?
kind of. I did. We had to have a couple meetings and talk about what it was going to be. There was going to be a comedy, and he was concerned about it being just an all-out just blood fest, and he was worried about that. And I was telling him this is going to be this is a horror comedy, so it's going to be there's going to be blood, it's going to be dark, but it's also in the spirit of the hopefully the the EC comics and whatnot. So it took a couple of meetings with him to get him comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's funny because Larry, great actor. I mean, everything you see him in, whether it be the villain in Darkman or for a lot of us, Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, where he's like the sympathetic character.
A little bit like Benny in
Yeah,
LA
I mean,
Law,
it's just amazing that he can go back and forth between that. I have one quick Larry Drake story, actually. This screened a couple of years ago here in Los Angeles,
Yes,
I think,
did,
at the
yes.
New Beverly. And I can't remember how I got to him, but somebody, I want to say Brian Collins was hosting the screening. Somebody had given me contact to Larry Drake, and I reached out to him about showing up. And initially, I think he was very reluctant and said no. He was like, I don't think I want to show up for that screening, whatever. And then Charles Edward Pogue, who is the writer of Psycho 3 and a friend of mine because I did the Psycho doc, a friend of mine on Facebook, saw that I posted how disappointed I was. And apparently they're really good friends. So he called Larry and he's like, Larry, come on, you got to appreciate all the movies you made. And if somebody remembers one of them, like that's an amazing thing. And next day he called back and was like, all right, I'll come to this thing. So he showed up for the screening, and apparently he had a good time and enjoyed it. And I've seen him. He was at the convention we were at in Texas a few months ago.
Oh yeah, he was.
So he's been embracing kind of the genre fans and people that appreciate his work there. The only funny thing about that screening that I heard was the Q&A went rather well, but somebody at the end was just like, can you do the Dr. Giggles laugh? And he's just like, no.
Fair enough.
And the gentleman who played Max Headroom was Matthew Frewer.
Matt Frewer.
That's it.
Thank you.
You're right.
Matt Frewer.
So, I mean, did you have any I'm trying to remember how hard the MPA was on horror movies at this time, because there is gore in the movie, but I also tend to notice that some of the sequences cut a little quicker than others. So
I felt like the first half didn't go all the way gory, and I was watching it just even today, catching up again, going, okay, he's cutting out here, and then thinking it was going to be like that the whole thing, and then suddenly when you do that flashback, you go there a lot more in the second half in the finale.
I remember being more grossed out by like the body of dead. The room
of
dead bodies.
That's actually one of the best set pieces.
We got a lot of stuff from the MPA. I remember being petrified that we sent it in for their review, and they came back and said, you guys got a lot of work on this before we give it an R.
Does it help to be a horror comedy, have comedy as part of it, you think? Then we were just talking about Cannibal Holocaust before you came. As you do on the show. And I mean, imagine that film going through that, it would, would never survive. But if there's a tone, or if it's a lesbian enjoying sexual pleasure, oh my God, let's not an American one. But do you think that helps at all, or do you think just when it has hearts?
I think it helped a bit. But they were pretty shocked at what we had, and they wanted us to cut out a lot of stuff. I actually remember we cut out some stuff. I mean, we cut out a lot of the gore, and I wanted to preserve the kid coming out of the the mother. So we kind of cut around it. But I remember there was some tense moments there where like, is this going to even go through? I mean, they were really hard on us. I think there was some attitude about horror films that they had taken up at that time. And it seemed to be we were getting a little bit of a brunt
post Leatherface. Leatherface was 1990, so this is 2 years after.
They seem to be a little bit on a crusade.
And just notice, for all you listening at home, how many times he just used the word they. now know that no one could tell you who they are. They are faceless moms.
I actually never met
pants.
we just got word back from on high that they do not approve.
It's so weird. I mean, if you watch there's that Kirby Dick documentary out there. This film is rated X.
Yeah,
I'd highly encourage every filmmaker to watch this film and educate yourself in what this is, because I come from a country that has a different kind of censorship. When you're in a different, smaller countries have a censorship board, which is a little different, but I can see it's a lot more transparent because it's a government institution. So even though I disagree with it on a censorship level, I can see how they made their decisions. The American system is just so bizarre.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to sexuality. Violence is one thing, but man, the way they go hard on sex and gay sex or lesbians, anything that just they're not comfortable with just gets brutalized. I think there's a movie right now that love story between John Lithgow and who's the bad guy for Spider-Man 2, Doc Ock.
Alfred Molina.
Alfred Molina. It's a love story about them trying to get married, and apparently there's like a sex scene. Apparently they've just come down brutally on this romantic comedy. And they're just like going after it. Like,
are they trying to get an R? Or are they trying to get a PG-13?
No, I think it's an R or getting them to remove something. I was just reading something about it the other day, just going, oh my God, come on. But I guess this idea of they is pretty frightening.
Yeah.
So we should make a horror film about that.
There's also, and I'm trying to look up the title right now. There's a really good book I've got. It's got a blue cover. That's all I can remember. But it's the entire history of the MPAA. But it specifically focuses on their portrayal of sexuality. And I'm trying to look up the title right now because it's a really good one.
They actually make an interesting film in itself, just the MPAA. Who are these people?
Yeah.
I mean, what do they do?
If you could get close enough. I think it would have to fall first.
They're associated with the Bilderbergs, I think.
Do you have to now, for televition, do you personally have to deal with that?
No, the studio has their standards and practices department. They have their own kind of, there's one guy who'll come back and just send you an email saying, this has got to go, that's got to go.
Because Jack Bauer cutting off a head, and I'll say this is very truthful. That moment in television, definitely one of the most, to me, shocking. Because if on a show like a Dexter or a lot of these new shows like Hannibal, that could totally happen, and you'd almost expect it would still be hardcore. But you're going there on a show like 24, especially how it sets up its tone. You're like, oh yeah, it's just mainstream entertainment, and then suddenly he does something that is so outrageous that it changes almost how I saw television forever. Like, how can a character cut off a head? Were you on that then, or did you? You were from the start. How did that, I'd love to know how that came up in a room.
Were you talking about this last season when he cut off Chang's head?
No, I'm talking about back whenever it was episode season 1 or 2.
Oh, season 2 when he
like that first time you have a character do something like that, and you're like, wait a minute, he's an American hero,
right. I was not there then.
Yeah.
No, I was not there then. But yeah, that was, I remember, but I was actually a fan at the time. I was
crazy.
I was on Star Trek at the time, but I remember watching it and thinking, "Holy crap, this is fantastic."
Yeah. Wow. Anyway, yeah, but back to Dr. Giggles. but I do think it's pretty crazy. And then the fact that you guys do Dexter is just, that's where you push it all. So,
I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about with in pertaining to Dr. Giggles is, revisiting it now, the cast is really, really cool. I mean, I'm sure with pretty much all the including the TV, all the projects you worked with, you've gotten to work with some interesting people like early in their career. But, Holly Marie Combs is the lead, and, she went on to find success with Charmed. I'm a huge fan of, I forgot she was in the movie Michelle Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, growing up,
she's
Blame
fantastic.
It on Rio and Waxworks. I was always in love. So, what was the casting process like? So did you have a lot of say in it for this particular movie?
Yeah, totally. No, it was pretty much who I wanted. I think I got all along. We instantly loved Holly when we saw her read. She was, it was interesting. Is one person who came in to read a very young Ashley Judd.
Oh wow!
And who was fantastic. And I was like, her. And then her agents came back and said, no, thanks. And I was like, well, why'd you send her in? I think they were just sending her out to meet casting directors. Right. But it blew. And before her, we read Jennifer Aniston.
Wow.
It was also great. This was post Leprechaun. That's one of the reasons she was brought in.
Post Leprechaun Aniston.
Post Leprechaun Aniston.
She's used by that time.
So crazy. I remember Aniston. I didn't want Ashley Judd. I thought would have been great, and then we were just kind of in a dry spell, and then Holly's audition came in, and she was tremendous.
I like her because she seems fragile. Like they're saying she's small and petite, and the character having the heart problem. Yeah. I felt like she was always in jeopardy at all times. Like she's strong, but. Yeah, not on the outside.
I just felt she was very warm and really drew you in. I just thought she was terrific. Glenn Quinn, I loved.
Yeah, I was really bummed because before the show I looked him up because I remembered him from Angel, and I really liked him. And I was like, he was Irish, wasn't he? And I looked him up, and of course he died young, very young,
shocking,
over heroin overdose.
Shocking.
Wow.
They were great. It was a great cast.
Good chemistry. Yeah.
They were a blast. It was still the most fun I've ever had in Hollywood was making that movie.
Was Larry, was he in character the whole film? Like when he was on set, or is he that type of actor, or was he hanging out with the kids?
No, he was hanging out.
Okay.
He was hanging out. He wasn't really,
Yeah, he turned it on and off.
He had turned it on and off.
Okay.
Now, were you shooting on a soundstage? Because you blow up the house at the end. So I'm assuming that was not an actual house.
She just jumped my question. You got to shoot my dream. Characters narrowly escaping an explosion in slow motion. One of my all-time favorite things.
You never go wrong, especially when they dive toward camera with the thing behind.
I was thinking Leatherface as well. Like anytime I see characters doing this, how fun is that?
Yeah. It was a lot of fun. So the house itself didn't exist. It was a false front we built on the end of a street. So the front of the house was an exterior kind of set, which we used to blow up the house. Bill Malley was the production designer who had done The Exorcist. He was the production designer on The Exorcist. Huh. He was an elderly guy at the time. It was like 60s or something. But a really interesting guy. But anyway, so he designed all that. He built the house, and we blew up the front. But most of it was done on stage in Portland, and all shot in Portland.
Wow.
Yeah. Who plays the dad? The dad's name just
Cliff DeYoung.
Cliff DeYoung. Yeah. I saw him. He was in Monty's last film.
Yeah,
and he's a really good actor. And he had my favorite part. My favorite line in the whole film is when he leaves the voicemail. And he says, "I'm your new doctor, and I'm right behind you." He goes, "What the hell?" And he turns around, cuts him, and then Dr. Giggles just goes, "You think that's bad? Wait till you get my bill." I was like, that I could identify with.
That was a good exchange.
Man, I would love it if somebody edited like a YouTube clip of just all of Dr. Giggles one-liners. That'd be so.
The person he reminded me most of was Arnie. I kept thinking about Arnie movies when I'm watching him because he has that similar delivery that Schwarzenegger has all through like Running Man or something. Right. Yeah. But for the whole movie, which is pretty wild.
Now, did you ever think of or keep in mind the prospect of a sequel? Had the film been a huge hit, or would you?
I had come up with a scenario, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it had something to do with Larry Drake. It was going to become a zombie film. Actually, it was Drake was going to be finally come up with a way to kind of reanimate bodies, and they were going to, under his control. It was going to go completely wacky with it.
Well, he looked good burned. I definitely think once he was burned at the end, that would have been maybe that would have pushed him into iconic horror status because he looked grotesque and is funny,
Yeah.
Right, but it was a lot of fun. It was a great fun to do, and it was I wish I could. Dying to do another horror film now.
What did the reception of it? You're talking about how it's kind of out of time with the times when it came out. How did it like do well box office, or was it critical? Was it tough all around?
No, it was pretty much tough all around, honestly. It didn't. The box office wasn't that great, and the critics. There was a couple of really good reviews. LA Times really gave kind of a rave, believe it or not. And but it was mostly, the slasher film, horror film, blah 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 blah.
It must have killed on VHS though. That's right.
Yeah, it did very well.
Because that's how I remember it.
It did very well on video, and it suddenly it was showing up. I don't remember on HBO or one of these channels. It was running.
See,
it
that's the
constantly.
unfortunate thing about these movies. They're not really made, especially at that period. They weren't really made for theatrical. I mean, it's great when you got to see them theatrically, but as fans, all of us were consuming them on VHS. So it's almost like you need to give them a little wider amount of time to judge whether they were good or not.
Yeah.
Well, and this is, by the way, and this is not an excuse about whether the film deserved success or not, but horror, I know at the time horror was in a real dearth.
Oh, yeah.
No horror films were making any money, and I was terrified of this before and after. It was just dead, and it wasn't. I think I'm right about this. It wasn't until Scream came out that suddenly everything turned around.
And it was all a formula from there. It was you did the teen, which yours has some of that. I mean, it has those same teen characters. I mean, a lot of those are familiar characters that became popular just 3-4 years later.
What was the big thing in '92? Like Wayne's World? I'm trying to remember what I was into. Well, in '92.
Jurassic Park came out in '92. I don't know if it was Wayne's World or what, but it was.
Wayne's World would have been around that time because I dressed up as Garth for Halloween.
John Woo, maybe, or is he 95?
I don't remember.
I think he's a little later.
Yeah, he's a little later.
But I do remember it was just impossible. It was like one after another. Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie had come out. Because Giggles, Dr. Giggles' trailer was attached to that.
They're similar tonally. I think they have a lot of similarities tonally.
But so it was a particularly dry spell for horror. Not to excuse whether
does the studio get that, or do you get the blame? Like who gets? I mean, when it comes out and everything's happening, are they looking at you, or do they get it? Oh yeah, the marketplace is.
I don't. Probably, a little of both. They're like, oh well.
But next. I remember that Giggles had a good merchandising push behind it, because I remember we had a Suncoast Video, which I don't think is still open. I think the chain went bankrupt, but we had one in my hometown, and I remember that there was like a Dr. Giggles kiosk where you could buy like a Dr. Giggles shot glass. And
they had some cool stuff.
Yeah,
I still had a lot of stuff.
I think I remember always seeing the ad leading up to it at the back of comics for like a whole year. I remember seeing that image.
Well, it was Dark Horse. It was Dark Horse. Dark Horse. This was Dark Horse's first production. This was Mike Richardson.
That's probably why, because I was probably into like Turek, Hunter, and all those comics right out of that Bloodshot. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, Mike Richardson went on to do the Bruce Campbell movies. My Name is Bruce. The Dark Horse ones, the one that he directed. And the man with the two brains, is that what it's called?
Yeah. And I did a couple of Dr. Giggles comics, which came out in the Dark Horse Presents. Remember those?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, actually, because of that, I think my brain thought it was based on a comic book character. So when I saw the movie, I remember going, oh, it must have been based on the comic.
Yeah, what was the comic like? Was it just like side stories, or?
It was kind of a prequel. I think if I remember correctly, I think I wrote a story about leading up to the events of this day, in between his escape as a child and the events of the movie. Wow. They were like very short little stories, because it was an anthology, Dark Horse Presents.
Right.
And there were 3 stories, and I think one was Flaming Carrot and a bunch of other.
I remember Flaming Carrot. That was an amazing looking character.
Still one of my favorite comics.
I like Cerberus. I remember the first couple of that, I was like, what
is this stuff?
He's like smarter than I am. How can I,
I don't want to have to work to read a comic. You know what I'm saying?
I love that the town is called Moore High.
That was actually, I went to Bishop Moore High School in Orlando, so I named it Moore High. That was my.
I just kept thinking Moore High.
It was a Catholic school. I don't know if they were happy about that.
Also, I looked before you got here, and I don't know if we did a couple episodes ago. We did a Hitchcock episode. It said you did something on Hitchcock Presents.
Yes, the first sale I ever made was for Alfred Hitchcock Presents. It was a script that I had written. I wrote it as a short film that I shot. It was a student film that I shot that got me into AFI, called Twist, and then I adapted it for an Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode. I actually forgotten about that.
Wow.
That was my first professional sale.
Because they seem to play every night on TV, and I never really watch it. That and Twilight's, and they're always,
right.
I'd love to see it.
By the way, the other great fun I had, and I don't know if you guys remember this show, was Monsters. Remember that thing?
Oh, yeah.
They just released the box set of
they
that
did.
a couple of months ago. It's really good. I have the box set. You may borrow it.
That was actually my first professional directing job. It was. They shot them all in a little warehouse about as big as this facility here. They never left. There was no location. It was like, this is where you're shooting. And it was like a student film production. But you had 4 days to shoot them, and they just did these compact little horror stories. And, I got paid $1,000 to direct my first film. You know, they paid the Writers Guild, but they didn't have a DGA. But so that was a total blast. And then after that was Tales from the Crypt.
What do you think about modern contemporary horror? Like, obviously, the wave you made this in was just at the end of one kind of wave. Then we had the wave from Scream. Lately, we've had Paranormal Activity and found footage.
Right.
What are you going to these days, or what actually still excites you about horror that you've seen?
I loved Paranormal Activity, the first one. I'm trying to think. What's the I kind of liked The Conjuring.
Yeah.
I wasn't a fanatical for it. I really was for a while. I was into all the classic Japanese. I mean, I loved all the Japanese horror, but the Japanese versions,
right?
Of the
Yeah,
horror.
right.
I mean, The Eye. I still is one of my favorites that I love. Recently, I'm kind of drawing. I mean, I don't. I'm trying to think of a recent horror film that's really kind of taken me by storm, and I can't really. Nothing comes.
If you
to
were
mind.
going to do something now, like when you're seeing what's kind of the trends, is there something you think you would really like to make? In terms of
what are you pitching? Well, you can't tell us what you're pitching right
subgenre
now. But
you
what
would.
subgenre?
My
are you
dream
hoping to work
would be
within?
to do a Lovecraftian horror
yeah.
film.
Nice.
I think Lovecraft is completely underserved.
Yeah.
Completely.
Well, totally underserved. I mean, it doesn't exist. I mean, Re-Animator was fantastic, but there has not been a Lovecraft movie, and my dream would be to do a serious, gothic, treatment of a Lovecraft tale, probably Shadow over Innsmouth, which is my favorite all-time Lovecraft story. So that would be my dream. I mean, I think that's a genre which, because it's not supernatural, it's actually Lovecraft is more like
Weird
kind of
fishy
Cronenberg, yeah, right, Cronenbergian sci-fi,
almost more like
right,
pre-human
exactly
in a way.
But and I'm going through a huge Thomas Ligotti fan. I mean, a Jag right now. So I mean, I love moody. My favorite horror director is Cronenberg. I mean,
All right.
The Fly is actually, I think, one of my. I still watch it constantly.
Yeah.
And I love that kind of horror.
You must deal with a lot of, casting directors and things like that. I wonder sometimes when I watch a movie like that, the casting of the chemistry between those two leads is so phenomenal that I had an experience recently where it felt so hard to get the kind of cast you wanted on a film. That you had these people pushing, just like, oh, this is a person from TV, and this person from CW has never been in a movie, but you need them.
This person gets points in
France,
right. So you need them.
It felt like maybe it's really hard to cast a great movie now. I don't know what your experience working with nowadays with.
Well, a lot of it is driven by international.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
You
Do
need
they
someone
sell
who's an
overseas?
international. Will this be an international? No, he's no good international. I hear this constantly. From directors who are trying to get movies going.
And that actresses don't sell international, and that action stars do.
Months ago, one of our friends who is a director showed me a list that was given to him by one of the studios.
Yeah.
And it was literally a list of actors who sell well in areas. And they were like, you can cast
Van
from the
Damme.
top 10.
You can have Van Damme.
Basically, that's
Kiefer
it.
Sutherland was on there.
Oh, was he?
He was.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, he's
Apparently,
There-
he sells well in Europe.
Oh, I'm sure. The 24 is huge overseas.
Was that part of the reason to do a season of it in England?
I think that was a big one of the
Very
big
international, yeah.
draws. Yeah, do something international. We want an international feel to the. It also was because creatively it's a fun thing to do. We hadn't done that before on the show.
And give the Russians something to hate. Take that, Putin. Jack's back.
There was one great horror film I saw recently. I'm trying to. I blanked out on the name, but it's a kind of a micro budget horror film. It looked like it was shot on somebody's, like a camera, like a Nikon camera, but it took place in the valley, and someone had vanished. A woman's husband had vanished in an underpass at the freeway.
That's Absentia.
Absentia.
It's made by one of my best friends in the world.
Well, I just absolutely loved that movie.
Morgan Peter Brown, you have a fan.
I actually thought it was magnificent. I mean, it truly Lovecraftian, creepy.
The director of that went on to do Oculus.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet. I
yeah.
want
So
to see
he
that.
did Oculus, the director of that.
Oculus is a very quiet, small film. Don't go at it expecting a big blockbuster just because WWE or Relativity was involved. It's still like, here's, a couple
Absentia
million,
is a really
go make a
small
movie.
film, too.
But yeah.
Senshi was really small, but there's something about it that got under my skin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a way that most horror films don't.
That's good.
I wanted to delve a little bit into TV in general. One of the things that's been amazing about television currently is how many different horror properties are all of a sudden popular. We've got Hannibal, we've got Bates Motel, we've got American Horror Story, all these things. And I being somebody that was on Dexter for several years, Dexter was my favorite show when it was on, and I feel it was I'm going to say a direct result of that. I feel like, before Dexter, there wasn't really a some people don't really call it a horror show, but because it's a serial killer and it's your lead character, and it makes it sort of commercial appealing to have a sort of horror-esque character in the lead. I feel like that just changed the way that people look at what can be popular on television. And
wait, if Norman Bates is a horror character, then Dexter's a horror character.
Yeah, and I mean,
totally.
They come from the same cloth.
And I love Psycho. I mean, that's why I love those two characters and why I think they resonate with people.
Well, Dexter is basically a slasher, a killer as the hero.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really look at it that way, I mean, that's what he is.
Were you on from the start?
No, I joined at the end of 4, I believe.
Which one's the end of 4? How does 4 end? Just so I know.
Lithgow.
That's Lithgow.
Right.
So Jimmy Smith.
One of the best seasons of any
your
television.
first season was the Jimmy Smiths one? Am I right on?
No.
That was third.
That was the third
okay.
one. That was before
that was good too. I really like Jimmy Smiths, but Lithgow was one of the best seasons of anything I've ever seen.
I really liked the Jimmy Smith season.
He was a good character. I think it's Jimmy Smiths actually as an actor came on so well the last 10 years. Like Sons of Anarchy, he's killing it on that.
Yeah.
He's just one of those guys.
Yeah, he's tremendous.
But Lithgow's stuff was.
Yeah,
I mean, I kind of wish they had just built the arc around the Lithgow. Like the next season, he's hunting Lithgow, gets him, and that's the story.
In retrospect, we should have kept him alive. They should have kept him alive.
They just,
he was too good.
Plus, he kept getting naked, and it's just he's naked in everything.
All those bad scenes.
Bad naked, as they
Always
say.
naked.
But I guess my question is, do you from the work that you did on a show like Dexter, do you see the influence that it had on other television?
Totally, absolutely. Dexter was, but it's also the anti-hero. I mean, making a serial killer your hero and watching him go through the rituals, and he didn't just kill people. He wrapped them in plastic and ritually stabbed them, and you saw the blood pouring and once that came on the air, and people liked it, by the way, the fact that it was popular, that it got big ratings, I'm sure everybody just wanted to push the envelope, and I have no doubt that it's led to kind of this renaissance of. By the way, people are saying, what do we do next? How farther can we go? And so you end up with Bates and American Horror Story, and who knows what's next.
I actually heard 2 days ago.
Damien.
Damien, for a terrible. It's like for Lifetime or something.
Yeah.
And I was just like, actually, as far as characters go, that might have been the greatest idea for television.
Well,
start young.
It's funny. Yeah. I mean, I was after 24. I actually I talked to my friend who produced 24, and we said we should do Damien. I had no idea. I had no idea. I said we should do a 5-year series of the rise, of the Antichrist, and go all the way to to the end.
Imagine
fantastic.
Each season could be 10 years forward, and
tremendous.
By the end you could have Sam Neill. Imagine if he's president and it's Sam Neill coming back going, I got that fucking thing on my head, 666.
But I have heard a rumor lately that Lifetime is buying quite a bit of horror stuff. So
I know, but I don't know if I like that.
I know, because I always, when I think Lifetime, it's like what my mom watches. It's like horror light. It's like maybe you could play Flowers in the Attic. Actually, I think they did a Flowers in the Attic. But it was Heather Graham, wasn't it? I just remember that. But I mean, that's kind of like your Sandra Bullock-y horror stories go
let's
there.
Let's wait and see, because where's Bates Motel again?
That is A&E. That's a weird
was
one
one
too.
You're
right. Yeah. And Netflix, I was very skeptical. I was very skeptical Netflix could pull off a show, and I mean, they put a lot of money into these things. They look great, and I love the way they're releasing them. When all 13 episodes come out, and I'm like, all right,
binge
let's do it.
Okay, Lifetime, we're challenging you.
Yeah,
I am a female. Your network is supposedly freaking made for me. Yeah. I want to see some good horror.
What are the biggest challenges? So you're on a staff of writers, right? When you're doing something like that, what are the biggest challenges to guiding a storyline from on a show like Dexter specifically? Because it seems like it could go in so many directions.
Well, I mean, the challenges are what you would expect. It's really just 7 people with all different kinds of opinions on where it should go. Huge arguments in Dexter about what we should do each season, and this he would never do this, and this is not Dexter, but we have to raise the bar, and it was vicious. I mean, Dexter was plotted differently than 24, where we kind of winged it more or less. But Dexter was plotted the entire season, so it was a long period of figuring out what the entire season was going to be. And then
because it's always about character, whereas Jack is just Jack's on autopilot.
Yeah, Jack's just like
he's rocking and rolling.
We just wrote Jack like we would purposely write ourselves into corners on 24 and then figure out how to get out,
because you can go as absurd as you want.
Whereas
Dexter did have to maintain.
Dexter had a more staid and thoughtful storyline.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite moment or episode of Dexter?
Well, I would, the John. My favorite Dexter episode was the John Lithgow Thanksgiving episode,
Yeah.
which I was not
Great one.
on for. So it's my favorite moment is when I wasn't there. But it was that. I think that's my all-time favorite. It was just you watch that episode and you were just horrified at this what looked, because I think it was the veneer of a lovely Thanksgiving Norman Rockwell dinner turned into a horror show.
Yeah, it reminds me of Little Stepfather.
One of my all-time favorite
Terry
movies.
Quinn is just that line where he's just, who am I now? You're just like, that is a great horror moment.
Yeah.
You know?
I remember dragging people to see that over and over.
Yeah. And if you had step-parents ever, you know that feeling. When you're young and you see that person in your house, suddenly they're touching your stuff and you've got these families joined. It's a weird, it's a weird thing. Your imagination.
I like 2 a little bit too.
I want to rewatch 2. I haven't seen 2 for a long time.
Mainly for Terry Quinn.
Stepfather-daughter. I
first one's
see her in
great.
Jump Cut all the time.
She comes to Jump Cut. Yeah, she comes to the cafe. I've seen.
weird,
She's
'cause
friends with
I'm
Tom
like-
Holland. That's why.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, he brought her there. I don't know how they know each other.
Right.
I
I
don't
don't
think she's
either.
anything.
Is Tom Holland directing?
Popcorn.
Is he doing horror?
He's
Yes
got
and
a couple
no.
of projects
Some shorts.
coming up. He's always talking
Oh,
about
wasn't he
did
attached
you-
to a Stephen King thing for a long
He
time?
was, yeah. I mean, he's still supposed to do that.
We have to have him in at some point.
Yeah,
we do.
Did you know him on Tales from the Crypt? Or?
No, I didn't know him. I knew of him because I'd seen a lot of his movies, and I was up for Child's Play.
Oh,
wow.
I had just finished my student film at AFI, and it was a horror film I made at AFI,
Right.
and I had brought the producers, somehow got wind of me, the agents or whatever, and they came to screen it, and they really loved it, and so they were flirting with the idea of letting me, straight out of film school, do Child's Play, and at the last minute, we just can't take the chance, and it was Tom Holland.
Is the short online anywhere?
It's not.
Oh, that'd be
It's
fun to
not.
see.
It was pretty cool. I'm going to try to. I have it at home. I just got. I'm going to put it on. I'm going to put it on
Vimeo is
DVD.
good because you can you could put longer films and higher quality than YouTube.
That is a great idea.
Yeah, and
I
then
should
you
put it on.
If you do,
Vimeo.
let us know. We can share it. I'm always curious to see what people did.
Yeah, it was fun. It was called Jack in the Box. It was about a murderous Jack in the Box.
That's why. Thus the Child's Play connection.
Yes.
Oh, that
I
was
see
the
it.
total Child's Play connection. That was what it was.
Which is a pretty smart way to go. Back to kind of what Rob was talking about, these other shows. Have you been watching anything like Hannibal? Are you interested in what some of these horror type shows are developing? Or
Frankly, I don't get a chance to watch much television.
Right.
I get obsessed with one show at a time. True Detective was my last obsession.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, had a lot of interesting sub-Lovecraftian Thomas Ligotti references.
Yeah, the references, yeah.
The Yellow King, which is from The King in Yellow, Robert Chambers, a lot of great old... So whoever wrote it, was a weird tale aficionado.
Right.
Not whoever, I forgot the guy's name, but
the guy who wrote The Killing, right? The first season of The Killing, I think.
Yeah,
I think he was. He was saying he was referencing all these. Somebody was trying to say he was plagiarizing, but it's like no, he's just referencing.
Yeah, I saw that article about the
I don't buy
plagiarizing. I
that.
read it through. I was like, no, this is not
No,
plagiarizing.
it's characters referencing things.
No.
It's
So I thought that was silly, but I was impressed that he was this guy was a student.
I think without that, it wouldn't have. I think the thing about the ending of each episode of True Detective left you so interested, almost put you in a detective's shoes of wanting to push a little further and deeper yourself, which a lot of shows don't have that because you didn't understand some of those references.
Right.
Like there were people reading books in between episodes because they wanted to get a bigger picture, which is pretty amazing.
But the relationship between the two guys, the outlooks, the diametrically opposed outlooks, I thought was fascinating.
That's why I'm bummed when I hear about a second season where all I hear is like, oh, maybe it's just all about stunt casting. All I hear is, oh, Colin Farrell.
Yeah,
oh,
right.
And you're like, no, I don't even want to hear who's cast. Just make an amazing show and then play it to,
Although I did hear that the script is fantastic for a first
great.
episode.
Okay.
Somebody had read it. Is it the same thing as is it going to compare? And the person who read it said yes, it does.
Well, I think the rare thing about that show was having one writer and one director for a whole season. And you didn't talk about Twin Peaks at the start, but I've been reading your tweets, and I know I remember in season 2 when I saw Diane Keaton's episode, remembering how bad it was. I remember watching that episode when I was young and go, "Oh, Diane Keaton directed this one," and going, "Oh my god, this is terrible."
Yeah.
Because some of the episodes don't have that. Whereas had Lynch done every episode, it would have been at a certain level, right? Because he would have.
I will save my Twin Peaks.
Well, yeah, we'll say that, but it is important to TV because it was a big part of. I mean, that's really the biggest game-changing television show of all time, in my opinion. It changed the way, the way stories could be told, and it went as dark as, I mean, you can't go darker than incest and murder. I mean, that's incest is pretty where it's at. Yeah. Do you remember watching that? Like, at the time,
I totally remember watching it. I remember just like, oh my god,
yeah,
it was fantastic. I remember reading about Mulholland Drive. That was a pilot originally that ABC rejected, and it was the article was fascinating because he wanted to do another Twin Peaks, but in Hollywood kind of thing.
Yeah,
and,
I think I just read somewhere that the idea on the set of Twin Peaks was he was talking to Sherilyn Fenn about the Audrey character and how well, maybe if we took Audrey and put her in Hollywood, we could have this Mulholland
that makes
Drive.
sense.
That was the kernel of the idea that became Mulholland Drive.
Makes
and then
sense.
he just like didn't.
I think it was because it came out the same time as Columbine. I think Columbine happened right when the pilot was delivered of Mulholland, and the violence instantly ABC was like, that's that.
Interesting.
Shelved it, and it took him 2 years before he was in Cannes. He met a producer who said, hey, if you can come up with an ending we could put in the movie. He's like, I have no ending. And he had this 30-minute dream. You know, the whole ending was literally one dream he had there. He's like,
oh,
boom.
right.
And it's amazing how cinematic that the rest is great, but it does feel a little bit at times like it's going out to a TV show.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
They're
But
setting
then
up
the last
characters
30 minutes
for the,
is about as cinematic as movies get.
Yeah.
And it all kind of ties in perfectly. But yeah, it's really interesting. Television could be just so incredible at times.
Yeah.
But it goes through these big waves. I wonder if the horror boom will just, maybe we're at the height of it right now, and maybe soon that the horror television will just kind of be too much,
Yeah, who knows? I mean, it's so hard to tell. You just never know what is going to be. I mean, for a certain point, at one point, their pirate movies were cancer. Forget it. Don't even touch it. And then suddenly
Roman Polanski's Pirates came out.
Well, remember Roman Polanski's Pirates? I remember sitting and watching and you're like, that was like the death of pirate. And suddenly the pirate movies, so you never know. And I think, it all depends on what the subject. I would love to do a horror series based on Miskatonic University.
Oh yeah,
set it all around Miskatonic, and I actually looked to see where the rights are to all the stories, and not all of them are available. Some are here, some are there, and they're not in public. So it's too difficult. But
not impossible. I mean, the idea of basing it on at a university is great, and we've had Stuart Gordon on before, and he's obviously the other big, pretty much the only other real Lovecraftian director who's gone there.
He's your only competition.
But if you work together,
I always think that Lovecraft, a lot of people don't touch him though, because everything is so mental for him. Like, you never really know what creatures look like. He'll just be like, it looked like a vague form I can't describe.
Unnameable, damnable thing.
Horrible thing. And then you've got time traveling witches who like travel through funky architecture and rooms. And I mean, these things, they make for great stories, but then when you're trying to turn it into something cinematic, it becomes really difficult.
It's not. It would not. You're totally right. It's not easy, but I think.
But I think you should do
Guillermo
it.
came close.
Guillermo came. Yeah,
he had his.
Now that is a particularly tough one to adapt. I have no idea what the script. I would love to get my hands on the script actually to see what they did.
I've heard it's back. It's back into the possibility of it happening again. Like he has gone back, because I think I heard him on NPR I mentioned on the show, and he talked for like 2 hours, and he said at the time, this was an old interview on NPR like 2 years ago, and it was before it just died, and right after it died, and they said, would you do anything differently? He had Tom Cruise, he had the $200 million, blah blah, but he wanted that hard rating,
right?
And he said, I would do something differently. Now I realize I was being too hard about it. Now I would just release their version 2 weeks earlier, and then 2 weeks later the harder rated version would come out and not go to like IMAX. Let their version go to IMAX and your main population, but everyone knows the other one's coming out, so the horror fans are waiting for that version.
That's smart.
It's the rate. Like, he really wanted to fight for an R-rated movie.
That's what stopped.
Which it should
But
be.
now it's like, I'm stupid. I should have just done a PG-13, and then I could have released my own R cut later. That's.
But I think I read something really recently saying that there's that he was turning his attention back to it, and that he really believed it could happen now.
Yeah.
So I hope so, because I don't need to see Pacific Rim 2 and 3 really. For me, it was like fun, but I want to see, like you, I want to see something
like that.
Unimaginable.
And that's why I love Lovecraft and why you really need to go make this, is that I'm always so intrigued by his films and often disappointed, because, when I approach something, like if somebody's making like a Cthulhu movie, you have no idea what you're going to end up with. It's just so batshit that it's hard to kind of
Dagon
conceptualize.
had those moments.
I loved Dagon.
The creatures in Dagon are pretty terrifying.
I got to revisit that one. I haven't seen that in a long time.
I love that movie.
I only remember being turned off a little by the lead, that he wasn't that strong an actor.
He was almost playing it like Herbert West at times. It was a little too like Shecky at points for me.
Right.
And then but it wasn't like as successful as it is in Re-Animator, because it was in a completely different tone.
Right.
But it comes off a little over the top at times for me.
Yeah, I couldn't get into that one for the same kind of reason. I mean, that was based on my all-time favorite, Shadow over Innsmouth.
Yeah.
And so because it started diverting too much, I kind of recoiled, because I'm a purist.
You would go faithful.
I would go as faithful as possible. Shadow over Innsmouth is,
and then it becomes Dagon.
Yeah.
Midway through.
Innsmouth is, the Order of Dagon was the church in Innsmouth. I mean, Innsmouth needs to be adapted. I mean, the short story is very simple, but I would prefer the New England treatment and just go even in period and just do the whole.
Yeah, because they said theirs. I think it was like Mediterranean, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think he got Spanish funding or financing or something. I think that
Brian
was the
Yuzna
situation.
was involved. That's probably why, because I know he was making all those films overseas. Even though the last Re-Animator was shot in Spain. I think.
Oh yeah, the Beyond,
which wasn't. Yeah.
Well, all right. Let's. Any more TV questions? I know you don't have
I'm a big
Star Trek.
But I will hold
get it out of your
because
system?
because they're not horror. I'll pick his brain after the show.
Okay. So our topic, medical malpractice, and I guess the best way to start throwing titles out. When you went to do Dr. Giggles, were there any films you went and looked back at that you thought kind of fit this horror mold?
Well, not really. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I was, believe it or not, the film films that I loved, that I wouldn't say, I mean, because I say these and you're going to say, where does this fit in, was The Birds and Psycho. Mm-hmm. Strangely enough, those were I was actually going for a more.
You have my attention.
I was trying, it was more for I was going for a more gothic, old, even though with the comedy, I wanted kind of a gothic and the Universal pictures. I really wanted. I looked at Dr. Giggles, humor aside, as kind of a Universal monster. Universal was actually releasing it, strangely enough. But I looked at him. That's why I wanted to give him that basement at the end, which with the mirrors and all that stuff. I was really going for kind of a haunted castle, gothic look in the old house and whatnot.
Like Phantom, almost Phantom bringing him back to the lair. Yeah,
it was those movies that I was influenced by. Honestly, those are the ones that I loved and I looked at and tried to apply that style to it.
Mm-hmm. Imagine doing an alternate cut, like if you had the raw footage of this, where you took out every joke. It just cut before he said it. It'd probably be kind of terrifying because he's kind of an intense-looking dude, right?
It would be pretty.
You just see these eyes, and then he's stabbing you, or he's picking up a golf club, but he doesn't make the joke. You're like, that's kind of that could be a fun re-edit.
That is the second YouTube challenge.
YouTube challenge for Dr.
Exactly.
Giggles. You will not get sued, we promise.
Yeah.
But I think the medical malpractice as a topic is really fun because when we look at obviously mad scientists and mad doctors are kind of like the starting point of most of this horror, from Caligari to Frankenstein to Moreau. I think there's one other Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So, Dr. Jekyll. And it's all these. I think it's this God complex that kind of fuels a lot of these movies. Right. That it's like, don't worry about their rights. What we're doing is more important than science. Right. We're pushing forward.
The other movie that really influenced me, or at least, and there was an homage to it in the end of Giggles, was Dead Ringers. Cronenberg's Dead Ringers. Because he had designed those twisted implements at one point. So at the end, Giggles brings up all this strange stuff, and I was like, I want to do a Dead Ringers type ending.
The whole way through the movie this time, I saw it obviously when it came out, but this time all I was thinking today was like, so when did he have the time to make? At 7 years old, he was in a mental asylum, but somehow he's got all these big implements. Come on. But
didn't he? But wasn't he? I guess he was in. He could have made him at the asylum.
He could have. But it didn't matter. They're still fun. It's not a film where logic dictates.
Right,
so
exactly.
You're given a free pass. But no, it does seem like the God complex is one of the major starting points, especially with that early horror. It's like, hey, it doesn't matter that that's somebody's body. I'm going to bring it back. Isn't that great?
Right.
Like, let's see how far we can push this.
It's the classic. There are realms of that man is not meant to probe, and that's the classic mad doctor
and the
scenario.
soul. My favorite in general, I think, with horror is that thing like, hey, I figured out how to bring someone back. Isn't that great? And then realizing, but what did you bring back?
Right.
Like, is there a soul in with whether it's Re-Animator or
I have Flatliners on my list.
Because they were all doctors in training, and they're all breaking the code.
Did that come before Giggles?
It was 1990.
Oh, so it was, I remember loving that movie. So
it was like my favorite movie when I was in middle school. It was like I'd bring people home from school to make them watch
I've never understood Schumacher's career, because Lost Boys and Flatliners are like, boom.
And I love Falling Down.
And Falling Down's really interesting too.
Falling Down, great.
But then there's this camp sensibility that, yes, of course, he was a fairly flamboyant guy, and he was a designer for a long time. But just after that, it just all kind of... Did he go directly after Falling Down, to Batman, or was it? I don't know. There's probably something in between, but I don't
remember.
But anyway, he did have that period where those were really interesting movies.
Flatliners is on my list, and I haven't seen it since I was a kid, but I saw it in theaters twice, and this is 1990, so I was about 14 or so, and it just the whole concept and the whole idea just blew my mind.
It's a great idea.
Scared me too.
Yeah,
the
it
little
kinda,
boy,
yeah, it creeped me
Danny,
out.
I think his name was, or something like that. But yeah, it scared me.
Yeah, so that's one of my favorites. Let's just throw some quick titles out. My favorite medical malpractice thing is actually an episode of Tales from the Crypt. It's from season 3, episode 4. It's called Abracadaver, and it stars Beau Bridges and Tony Goldwyn. It was directed by Stephen Hopkins. And it was a story about they play brothers, and one of them played a practical joke on the other, which essentially ruined his like medical career. Like he was in college studying for a test or whatever, and it totally ruined him. So the brother gets back at him later by injecting him with something that makes him appear to be dead, but he's still conscious. So the entire episode is from his point of view, where they're essentially taking his body and getting ready to do the autopsy and all that kind of stuff.
Which could be a riff on...
it's an Alfred Hitchcock episode.
Oh, it could be that as well as, I think it's Long Night of the Glass Dolls, the Giallo film.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The whole Giallo film, he is on the slab at the front, and you think he's dead, but he's narrating the story like Sunset Boulevard, but as it goes, you realize he's been injected with something, and he's narrating the whole mystery, trying to figure out like why he's on the slab about to be operated on. And I'd be interested to see what year that it was. I think it might be.
I own that.
That might even be who's the guy from Django? Franco Nero. It might even be Nero. It might be Fabio Testi, one of those guys. But so maybe there's this long line of those kind of stories, and then you put your own spin. You know,
well, I wonder if that one was adapted from a Crypt comic. It might have been
exactly.
One of those
Yeah, which is always if somebody can solve this riddle.
I'm looking it up right now.
I don't have time to look on that.
I've actually never seen that movie. I'm going to have to check it out.
It's interesting. I mean, it's not as good as some of the others, but the actual style
It just did a
of it's pretty
re-release
interesting.
recently because I have a copy of it. That's a press copy.
Yeah, I was watching for a montage. I had to make all these Giallo films, and then that was one of the ones that at least it was going for something very different.
Yeah,
right.
Because I remember definitely thinking, "Oh, he's dead," but he's narrating story. Oh, yeah, I've seen that. You know, but then as it goes, you're like, okay, this is pretty interesting.
Yeah,
it's always
so
a
I
news
like that
reporter or
stuff.
something. Well, yeah, Herbert West is like to me one of the great
all-time
characters.
Quintessential.
Yeah, but actually some recent ones I think I love Dr. Vaniket from House on Haunted Hill. Jeffrey Combs again.
Okay.
Because he's only used in this tiny little way. He's head of a mental asylum, but the way that was used in this in this remake of which was the one element that was totally different from the original, which I think gave it a real punchy, a fun little horror edge. And I actually think Dr. Logan from Day of the Dead is a really interesting doctor.
Yeah.
Especially as just a character. He's a fascinating. And what's cool about it is you could almost go, but is it medical malpractice? Because it's all bets are off.
Yeah.
When we're dealing with
the
like
dead.
over half the population are dead, but he was like really he was like one of the better portrayed because he seemed to be really empathetic and caring, but also doing things that are like grotesque. And whereas Dr. West is just he's
focused
in
on
his
that.
tunnel vision. But yeah, when I saw it not recently again, David did, and I was like, he's a really great character.
I totally forgot about that. He's great.
Are you sure it's Short Night of the Glass Dolls?
Or Long Night of the Glass.
An American journalist in Prague searches for his girlfriend who has suddenly disappeared.
Yeah, I think that's the name.
Okay, it was 1971.
Who's the actor and all? Or just show me the
Aldo
picture.
Lotto.
It could be the August something too. That doesn't.
Well, other quick titles really quick.
It is that one. It is that
okay.
one. This cover here.
X-Ray, aka Hospital Massacre, which stars Barbie Benton. Scream Factory put this out as a double bill with Schizoid, and it's a really you got to see it to believe it.
There was a trivia question about it on Thursday.
It's pretty campy and crazy, and I dig it. It's also a good Valentine's Day horror movie. There's not a lot of those. So that one's great. Of course, I have strong memories of Halloween 2. That
that was a great hospital set movie.
Almost the whole thing's in the hospital, and
Is there any malpractice though? I guess if Michael's doing it. the scariest doctor, I think, like bar none. If there's one doctor who I think Dr. Chenard in Hellraiser 2 is such a good character.
Yeah.
Like he is frightening. He wants to see shit that I don't want to see. I remember seeing that when I was pretty young, and the kind of sexual stuff he wanted with Julia, and bringing Julia back. You're just like, oh no,
it's not worth it.
No, it's these people. For me, one of my first memories is non-horror, and it's being horrified of Nurse Ratchet from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because she was a nurse, and it is malpractice the way they would treat humans, and her character was so scary. I think she was an amazing character.
I'm surprised you haven't said Shock Corridor.
I was going to say, I was about to say Shock Corridor.
Shock Corridor, though, but I always feel like he, because that was based on a true story about a journalist who actually checked himself in and then couldn't get out. A part of me just thinks that goes beyond just one bad doctor, right? That was a whole system of giving people electroshock therapy, But you're right, it's an interesting film on the topic.
Don't Look in the Basement is another one.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
It's severely flawed.
I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, it was definitely a play, and actually, I think that they use scenes from Last House on the Left in their trailer. I'm fairly sure they do. So it was definitely kind of along those, Last House on the Left lines. But yeah, it was set in a mental institution where it's kind of the inmates are slowly taking over the asylum type setup. But it was. I think it was from. Hold on, did I write down the date? I didn't. I want to say 70s. I mean, obviously, it was post Last House on the Left, but. Yeah, it was. I remember being fascinated by it. So.
Easily the most fun, and I bet everyone will agree with if you've forgotten it. Steve Martin. Think about Steve Martin.
Little Shop of Horrors.
Right. That is like one of the most fun. He's not even in it for long, right? It's like 8 minutes or something.
But it's so good.
It's great. Or even The Dentist.
Yeah, The Dentist.
Right, used to creep me out. They used to play it.
You mean the Corbin Burnson one?
Yeah.
See, I always think of those all together. I think of all these ones like Dr. Giggles, Corbin Burnson. Dr. Giggles stands out because it wasn't part of just something that kept going as franchises. Like The Dentist, they're just, you're going to keep milking something.
The Dentist 2, brace yourself.
Yeah, and they weren't as good movies. But I do think there was a lot of these, there was never a gynecological one. I mean, Teeth is the closest thing, and it's not about a doctor.
Dead Ringers.
Oh, yeah. Dead Ringers was creepy.
Yeah.
I don't know. See,
it doesn't feel like an exploitation film, though. That feels like a legit.
It's not that I haven't, seen people try to get gynecological films across. I don't think that you could push it through the MPAA. Female sexuality is still like a no-no.
Yeah.
So anything that involves,
Dead Ringers was the scariest thing I ever saw in my whole life. Like when I was a kid, I saw it on TV. I probably said it here before. And the part with the instruments and the extra hole. That's all I remember.
Yeah.
They kept talking about, she's different. She has an extra. And that
how
dream.
old were you at the time? Because that's the key to
9
this.
or 10.
Yeah.
You saw that at age 9 or 10?
On TV. Like I wasn't meant to be watching it. And I didn't understand it. And then they had a dream where they're all making love to each other. And then one of them bites on the sack. Like an embryonic sac, and I remember just going, "This is like my life is over. This is so terrifying. I can never make love to a woman because they're going to get me with their embryonic sac and extra hole."
Well,
damn you and your extra hole.
I'm gonna use it. Yeah.
I don't know if it qualifies as medical malpractice, but The Brood.
The Brood is
that was an
phenomenal.
institute. I mean, they were doctors, and they were they were looking for psychoplasmic manifestations.
It was all about manifesting your emotions in a physical form.
Yeah, I mean, Cronenberg, a lot of those films have that, whether it's a scientist or Scanners or Dr. Oblivion and Videodrome. I miss that side of Cronenberg.
Yeah.
I want him to kind of try just one movie.
Just come on, give us.
I'm hearing good things about the new one. It's about to come out. It's all about
Which
Hollywood.
one's the new one?
It's a satire of Hollywood, but it has a lot of violence and a lot of Julianne Moore won Best Actress at Cannes.
It doesn't have mutants in it.
It doesn't have mutants. I think his body horror.
Come on.
I think he's passed his body horror torch to his son. Probably, if he's making movies. No one said Dieter.
Also from 1990, same year as Flatliners, I've got Jacob's Ladder.
Oh yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, I'm forgetting a lot.
I can't
of
remember who did that to them though. That wasn't it Vietnam.
It was Vietnam.
Agent
It was an Agent Orange
feeding
type
them
thing.
some stuff.
But there is a tremendously creepy doctor scene.
Yes,
When he goes
with the
to hell.
hospital.
When he's that's one of the great all-time sequences when he's in the stretcher and he starts off in a real hospital. And little by little, you start seeing body parts as he's rolled down to below.
And then you see the doctor with no eyes holding the syringe.
Right.
That's really one of those films that all horror fans, if you haven't seen, you should check that out.
It's a
It
masterpiece.
blurs that line between thriller, drama, and actual horror.
I remember the scene because 1990. I was in like 6th grade when that came out, but I remember seeing it right when it came out, and I was really just mesmerized by there's this dance scene where he's at a club and he starts realizing that the woman that he's dancing with has a tail.
It's the devil. Kind of felt like the devil or something.
I remember watching that over and over with my mom's pause button because it's really kind of ambiguous what's going on, but trying to pause
you want to hear
it
something
see
funny?
it.
I was actually doing that exact thing like a couple weeks ago.
With Jacob's Ladder and the tail?
It was because I'm always fascinated by it because it's very hard to see. And he's in his apartment and it's his girlfriend he doesn't want to dance and his girlfriend starts dancing. He's going through some waves and she's dancing with somebody who's standing behind her. And the tail, I don't think is actually, it might be hers, but she's fondling the tail.
That's it.
And then what you're supposed to get, which is really creepy, this is why I was watching, I was like, what is actually going on here? He's, I think, entering her from behind.
Right.
And it comes out her mouth. A big like spike comes out of her. That's what makes him freak out at the party.
Wow.
If you watch it slowly, you're like, it's hard to see. It's all impressionistic. When you slow it down, you can actually see what happened. and it's just magnificent.
And you never get to see the scene with her extra hole.
No, you don't get to see the scene.
No one got to see that scene. That's cutting room floor. No one here said Human Centipede, which
I don't want to say that one.
No, but that movie might be kind of silly, but he is a really fun character.
No, he is.
Dr. Dieter is fun.
The classic German, evil doctor.
Because it's so outrageous. You've got to give props to any idea that outrageous. Like whether the execution of the film's stupid or
the
not.
The doctor from Maniac Mansion.
I don't think I've seen that.
Did no one?
The George Lucas game?
Yeah.
I love that game.
Play Maniac Mansion?
I played Maniac Mansion.
I never heard of that.
It's amazing.
Right.
It's absolutely amazing.
But he was fun. Like at least he had a bit of flair. Without that film you wouldn't get through that movie.
I like that movie. I like movies that go for it.
Yeah, that film went for it. And then so did I actually like the second one more. I thought it was.
I actually didn't see.
No, it's really interesting.
It was good?
It's a satire basically of the first. It's a really self-referential film. I mean, it opens with a guy watching the first film. And he's like a security guard, and it then goes into his life. And you're like, oh, okay, what am I watching now?
It's worth seeing. I'm going to check it out.
I really think number 2 is actually pretty interesting. Whether it's fun, that I'll leave it up to you.
A little more intense.
It's no Dr. Giggles. Let me put that. You might not laugh as much. But I don't know. I'm trying to think any other. Oh, well, there's a whole series. Oh, you go.
Yeah, I've got Unrest, which is an After Dark film that came out a couple of years ago about a girl who's a new medical student, and she's dissecting this cadaver, and one by one, anybody who comes in contact with this cadaver is met with this bad demise. It's actually a really good film. Some of the After Dark ones tend to be a little wonky, but I mean, like Lake Mungo was an After Dark film.
Sometimes
so no, Unrest. I thought it was pretty
Unrest.
good. Fragile, which was one of the Fangoria films from 2005 that we released a couple of years ago. It was made in 2005. I think we didn't release it till a couple of years later. But it's Callista Flockhart in a children's hospital. Really creepy.
Yeah.
Remember the cover of that one.
Yeah.
Pathology, which was 2008. I liked. That was a group of medical students daring each other for who could kill and not be detected.
Is that the guy from Heroes? Was he in that one? Or am I thinking a different movie?
In it. I don't remember the star.
Milo, I thought he starred in one similar to that. I
He
thought
is
it was
in
Pathology.
one, but I don't know which one.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I liked that one. It had some flaws to it, but I still liked it. And then one of the ones that I have to say creeped me out, and it's kind of a trite answer, but Outbreak.
Oh, yeah.
When I was in high school when that came out, and I mean, all of a sudden I was scared to death of disease.
You could re-release it right now in New York with a ball.
Yeah,
and
really.
It'd be like,
It was prescient.
No.
No one has
It's so
mentioned
true.
Dr. Fibes.
yeah. Well, what kind of doctor was he? I'm trying to think.
I don't remember, but I remember he was. What was great about it was he was taking revenge over people
Using the
who had-
Egyptian.
Yeah, he
Right,
used the
exactly.
plagues.
Yeah.
No, it's actually one of the most beautiful looking.
Yeah, no, it was gorgeous. It
Yeah.
was spectacular.
But I
film.
don't know what he. Oh, he was. No, the opening scene is him doing a surgery as a doctor before the. You were totally right.
No, he's a doctor who's
That's
taking.
right.
He's the villain and the good guy in a sense. He's taking revenge over a wrong.
And when I mentioned earlier tonight, Vincent Price again is a doctor in The Tingler.
Yeah, the Tingler.
Oh, yeah,
and he
yeah,
experiments on himself in that, which
He
is cool.
injects himself with LSD, which was kind of cutting edge for the time.
My favorite of all of these, I left to end, and if you've never seen it, you'll have a lot of fun, is actually the Von Trier's The Kingdom. I think that as a sit down, if you've got, it's how many just. I watched on tape, and it was like 2 long tapes. It might have been like 6 to 8 hours of viewing. It was broken up for TV, like 1 hour.
Oh, I heard about that. Yeah,
And the American remake was like.
I've only seen
Let me
that
put it
one.
this way:
Yeah, it was
there's
Stephen King.
There's a scene in this thing, where Udo Kier is basically being reborn through a woman, full size Udo Kier now coming out full bodied in one of the most insane scenes I've ever seen in any capacity. But the tone is funny, scary. It's like a little bit of Twin Peaks. It's terrifying at moments. It's like a ghost story. It's a haunted hospital that's built on, perhaps the graves, and it keeps cutting
I
to.
thought it was built on a bleach swamp.
No, I
or
can't.
Something about bleach.
I
No,
actually
there's-
don't even remember. It's been a while since I actually watched the second season recently again because it came on TV, and it's just phenomenal. Like I really think it's phenomenal, and I think I love when Von Trier strays into horror, like when he leaves some of the the art stuff. And like Antichrist to me was really phenomenal, and like his early work was all pretty much a lot of it was horror based,
watch it.
film noir horror. So yeah, I would if you're looking for that next like TV show, highly recommend it. It's Scandinavian. The characters are funny and weird. And
It's cool. Yeah, I have that one. Never watched it though.
It's actually
the
scary.
American one is not that funny. It's more just odd because I remember, and I have
It looked
not
watered
seen.
down big time.
There's an anteater of death.
The origin doesn't have that.
Okay, and then there's the two children with Down syndrome in the basement.
They do have that. They're
okay,
kind of the
and they're
narrators,
kind of like the Greek
innocents.
chorus.
Yeah,
I'd call them.
Exactly.
That
is
they
part
make
of the original.
Commentary on everything.
But Von Trier's is like it's like anything you've seen of his, where the characters are just like they're really crazy characters. Like they're real, but they are all pushing limits in their lives just to see kind of they're bored, you know. And so there's an ambulance driver who purposely drives the reverse way through traffic every night, and everyone gambles on. He puts on a balaclava and he just puts the metal down, and everyone's taking bets at the hospital. Will he, you know, get in an accident? Will he not? And so all these characters start coming together. But it is a classic ghost story. But once Udo's storyline comes in, it's when you're just like, this is great. I mean, it's pretty bizarre. It really is interesting though, because everyone's kind of messed up.
Can't wait to check that out.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and give my favorite from 2004. It's a Japanese film called Infection.
I heard about that. I've never seen it.
It is. I can't say that the plot.
It's in this book, I think, Hidden Horror.
Is it?
Yeah, I believe it is. I wrote it down.
I can't say that the plot is anything in depth. It's literally just a night at the hospital. A weird body arrives. No one really knows what to do with it or what he's suffering from, because he seems to be kind of melting. But slowly it infects the psyche of everyone who works in the hospital. And it's not like they're becoming infected with a disease. They're becoming infected with madness. And it is
Which is
so
always interesting,
gory,
yeah.
and it is so beautifully shot, and the color green is used just exquisitely throughout the whole thing. I love it. So yeah, it's not like a big plot heavy thing. It's very visual, but it is so oozing.
Well, we're scared of hospitals. I always think you're scared because there are sick people. Like, I remember having to take in a 2-year-old. He had a croup or whatever, where he's struggling to breathe. It was like midnight. It was scary. Like the scariest moment I probably had in my life, because you're worried, oh my God, is he just going to stop breathing? And it turned out later it's not as serious as it felt. But you take him to a hospital, you know, in the middle of the night, and there's no one really there. And suddenly there's an insane person who the cops are chaining to a bed. And then there's another person who's like, sounds like they're dying and coughing. And you realize, actually, this is a scarier place than when I'm at home with my, my kid who can't breathe. So you realize there's infections, there's people dying around you. I mean, it's a pretty crazy.
You basically want to get in and out of there as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
In whatever scenario.
I had a friend staying with me a couple years ago who had an anxiety attack at like 5 a.m. and begged me to take him to the hospital. So I did. And he got in right away, but I had to sit in the waiting room from 6 a.m. to 9. And I saw some of the most horrifying shit come in there. I mean, there was one dude that like this woman like pulled up her car on the curb and rushed this guy in a wheelchair. And I mean, I assume he just couldn't feel anything from his waist down because the bone in his shin was just sticking out.
Hey.
And
Burt Reynolds.
She's like freaking out. Like, oh my God.
That little piece of meat that was dangling from that bone from
That was enough to
Deliverance.
scar me forever.
Oh, and it was all white. It was bloodless.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But by the way, one of the great all-time hospital scenes is not necessarily medical malpractice. Has to be It's Alive.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
At the beginning of It's Alive. I mean, what a night. That's the ultimate great opening nightmare.
It really
scenario.
is one of the best scenes because it totally gets you in that when it's so hard now because having had a couple kids, they've brought you joy, they've done all that. But before, all you could think about is, I don't understand how this is going to work. Like another human's about to come that is part of our life. And so you're just, and back in those days where the man
they're
would
all
stay
hanging
in the
out, and they're all
hallway.
hanging out in the waiting room with all the other guys.
And then there's just blood everywhere.
And then a
everyone's
nurse
screaming.
staggers out from the room.
No, I agree with you completely. That's one of the best openings ever. I love that movie in general. We've talked about it.
I love that movie. I
think
saw it.
it's a
I actually
great
saw it
movie.
in a theater. I mean, that's how old I am. I actually saw it in a multiplex when it came out.
That must have been what, early 80s or is that?
No. I
it's
think
really
it's got to be
late
before that. It's got to be. I think it's 70s.
Okay.
It's 70s.
Yeah,
I guess
the
they're sequels, so
were
I'm thinking.
80s,
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. In closing, Visiting Hours, Bad Dreams, Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Just wanted to get those out.
Yeah, they're all good.
Patrick.
Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is terrific.
Patrick, yeah.
Patrick.
Has anyone seen the Patrick remake?
No, but it's on Netflix since.
I
I'm
might
going to
check it out.
by
I might
next
check
week.
that out too, yeah.
But all right. So that was Medical Malpractice.
Yeah.
Our very special guest, Manny Coto. Thank you so much.
Yes.
for
Thank you
coming
so
out,
much for having me.
giving us
Great
your
pleasure.
time.
And we
Great
hope
fun.
we all want you to do something in horror,
Yes.
especially if it's Lovecraftian.
I want the Miskatonic.
I do too. I think that would be magic.
Yeah. What's next? Are you working on anything at the moment that you could talk about?
We're actually I can't talk about. We've just finished 24 and I have a deal at Fox and there's 2 projects that are well, I might as well just. I mean, we actually just sold a horror series.
Oh, wow.
Literally sold it yesterday.
Cool.
Yesterday,
That you'll stay involved in, or just
well,
a
I'm going
sales?
to produce and write. Yeah. it's
Oh,
gonna be-
nice.
So,
That's
so,
all right.
so very excited. I don't want to talk about it
Yeah,
yet
you can give us the exclusive later.
the deal is not done. I mean, they bought it, but they're working out the particulars of it. So that's how the minute we got off 24, I'm like, we're doing a horror series.
That's
Yes.
great.
And
For
so-
Fox.
Right.
For Fox. Fox One
Fantastic.
horror
We'll
series, and
update us on that one.
hopefully it'll be good. Well, I'll update you on it. But
Hopefully Jack Bauer. Hopefully Kiefer's not playing the character from Dark City.
Yeah, no, he's playing the character from Mirrors.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow.
And does 24 get renewed, or was that meant to be a one-off, or no one knows yet?
It was the idea was originally as a one-off, but it's not.
It was a ratings bonanza, right? Like that.
Yeah.
Really
It's
well.
I think it's safe to say it's going to come back in some form or another. So those discussions are already starting to rear their ugly heads.
I want to see him back in back. I want to see him as president. Really, President Bauer would be. That's when you're going for it.
Wow, awesome. Well, we'll keep you posted on when the Fox show actually happens.
We'll see.
Talk about it more.
Watch Dr. Giggles. Refresh it in your mind. So
yes.
I guess the last question should be: is this going to be on Blu-ray?
I don't know.
It actually is on Blu-ray, but it's a crappy. They didn't release it in the proper format.
Oh.
And it's paired up with some movie which I've never heard of called Otis.
Which is actually it's not bad.
I don't know if it's good or I just never heard of it. So
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it. That's a weird one to pair it up with, though.
So they paired it up with.
is better.
Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah. I'm wondering because I think this DVD might be out of print now. I'm not sure.
It might be.
It's
I don't
part
know.
of a great collection.
But the Blu-ray is out. I know the Blu-ray, but I wish they had done because we shot it on 133, not 133. It was the large 233 or whatever, widescreen.
Right.
And it was really
So it's not like that on the Bluray.
No.
Interesting.
And it's Warner Brothers, huh? All right. Well,
Get on it.
maybe we could talk to some.
Yeah, some Screen Factory
people
guys
about-
are saying and see if they can get some good extras. Did anyone shoot behind the scenes at the time?
I think, they did. They shot
Be
a lot of
interesting.
behind the scenes stuff. It could be fun.
Okay.
It could be a fun little
Well, if anyone wants to do it,
Criterion.
put your criteria.
Criterion
The Criterion.
Collection.
They're always listening to
Do it
this.
right.
We just can't. The Criterion.
With a book and the whole thing.
They're
and
like our
everything.
fanboys.
Yeah,
Criterion
of course.
Collection.
Criterion
They're
have
always
done
like-
some
Criterion's
horror,
our
but not
bitch.
really.
They have.
No, they've done
Not
a little
really.
bit.
Not too much.
I mean,
Not-
they did shot Corridor. We talked about it
Yeah,
tonight.
but that's not horror. I mean, drama.
Yeah, that's kind of more thriller.
Onibaba. Onibaba's good movie.
They
Japanese
did.
horror.
Well, they did the Halloween on Laserdisc. I'll give
They
them
did
Criterion did
House
that?
Yeah.
Which one?
House Sue.
House Sue. And,
They did.
They
the
did
Cronenberg stuff.
Videodrome. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Scanners.
Cronenberg's.
Yeah, they did
Cronenberg has-
Videodrome. That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, but I bet they
Beautifully.
wouldn't do Shivers. You know,
They
And
prob-
Shivers
well,
is
they
a great
might.
movie.
They might.
No, I think
They
they'd
might.
be snobby.
I think The Brood is next, I believe.
Really?
That's the rumor, yeah.
That's one of my favorites.
I'm pretty sure they're doing
Cronenberg
that.
movies.
So, anyways,
Yeah, this
thank
was
you so much,
fantastic.
Oh,
Manny,
it's,
for
by the way,
coming.
Scanners. They just did Scanners.
Yes,
Yes,
Scanners
you're right,
is a
you're
great,
right.
great
Beautiful
release.
edition. Anyway.
I got to rewatch that.
Thank you for coming down. We will be back next week. We might be checking into.
Yeah, we might spend a night at Motel Hell.
A little bit of Motel Hell next week.
There you go.
I'll be wearing my pig mask.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks so
See you
much,
next
Manny.
week.
Thank you, guys.
Bye bye.